Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. The Terror of Fear. Karen shuffled restlessly in her chair as she stared at the wall in front of her. The only sound at the moment was from her tapping foot, her scowl getting worse by the minute as she waited for her master to get back already. That was the scene Yuki walked onto as she entered the prison, spotting Karen near the entrance with a nervous security guard just hidden round the corner. "Well, what's got you in such a foul mood? You took forever," muttered Karen in annoyance. "Whatever, how's Yuzo? She awake?" "She's fine, don't worry your pretty head about it. Still asleep though. That drug got her good, but it's wearing off now. Should be awake in maybe 10 minutes, and I've got Shunsui watching her for when she wakes up." "You left the pervert with my sister?" Yuki smiled nervously as she saw the outraged look on Karen's face. Now, Shunsui's a nice guy. Besides, Naneo is with him. And don't forget that he's best friends with your father. If he did anything, Ishine would kill him. Where the hell is Goatchin anyway?" Karen crossed her arms as she glared at Yuki. "He's always gone around about this time of the year, but you think Yuzo getting drugged would have caused him to come running back?" "I may have not told him yet." "You didn't?" Karen shrugged. "Your funeral then. He'll be mad at you when he gets back." "It's not my fault," protested Yuki. "The idiot forget his communicator lacrima. How the hell can I contact him without it?" Karen shrugged again before she turned towards the way deeper into the prison. "So, can you get me in there? You already can see minor level prisoners because of your father, though it is kind of useless since you never even wanted to. Anything higher is restricted." "So Taoshiro?" "Yeah. Out of your authorization." "I caught him," muttered Karen in annoyance. "I have a right to hear his interrogation." "Do you really want to hear it? Or do you want to interfere with any of the more extreme methods?" Karen's silence was answer enough for her. "He's a dark mage, Karen. Don't sympathize with him. Don't feel sorry for him." "I'm not. I just want to know why the hell he's in a dark guild like this one. He joined Fairy Tail when he was 12, right? You looked at my classified documents. You don't care, so don't pretend to hear. Anyway, I want to know how he went from that to who he is today. Hell, nothing he even does seems to particularly scream dark guilds. He attacks them for crying out loud. You are letting his outside appearance and actions deflect you from his mind itself." Yuki let out a sigh. "To be honest, I have no idea why he does what he does. I follow orders, however, and my orders were to bring him here for interrogation. And quickly too. I wondered why we rushed back so quickly," muttered Karen. "Do you know how hard it was to keep up with you? Hey, you did manage. Don't see why you're complaining too much." Yuki started walking down the corridor before stopping after hearing the sound of footsteps following her. "If your steps don't match mine, then how the hell do you expect to sneak after me?" "It's be useless anyway," stated Karen, her arms crossed. "I'm coming too. You can't stop me." "I could. I mean you won't." Yuki let out a long sigh before waving her hand at the nearby guard, letting him know not to stop them. "Fine then. Don't say I don't treat you at times." The smile that shot to Karen's face was quickly crushed by her usual indifferent look, but Yuki still felt sad from seeing how happy she had been. It was terrible luck to fall in love with someone on the opposite side. She'd hoped it would have just been a passing crush, but it seemed Karen would end up with her heart broken eventually. Taoshiro could not be trusted. Not so long as he was a mage of Fairy Tail. Leading Karen down the levels of the base, they quickly passed the taunts of nearby prisoners as they tried to head for the deepest levels. The prison was known to most as the Maggot's Nest. It wasn't the best prison by far. It was mainly used as a holding facility, but it was still made secure by being within a minute's reach from nearby generals. Most of the people on the upper levels were low-level dark mages, getting ready for their trials and then to be transported to different facilities. The lower levels, however, were far more secure, used to hold those who were a more significant threat. As they passed through a doorway, Yuki felt a chill go down her spine. The lower levels had a very special bit of material built into the walls. Sekizeki was embedded in areas of the walls, giving it a very strange effect with the pattern it had been positioned in. The material was rare enough as it was in a pain to produce. Because of it they had to have the walls half Sekizeki and half normal. Very hard to escape from within but fairly easy to shatter from the outside. It did mean however that Taoshiro's power was restrained within the room somewhat. His magic was currently being suppressed by the handcuffs he had been forced to wear, but it seemed the current level wasn't enough since the cold air was definitely a result of his power. Grabbing the keys from the wall, Yoriyuki twirled them around her fingers before picking out the right key and slotting it into the door. With a loud click the door opened a crack, Yoriyuki pushing it open the full way before letting Karen in first. After her apprentice had gone in she followed, shutting the door behind her and locking it. She was fast enough to catch Taoshiro if he tried anything, but protocol had to still be followed. Leave no exits, even if they would be useless anyway. So then, shall we start our little Q&A? Yoriyuki clapped her hands together before pointing at Taoshiro. So what were you doing at Harjan Town, kid? Taoshiro simply looked at her before smirking, not saying a word. Yoriyuki ignored the urge to hit the man in front of her before she tried again. All right. How about this? Where did your friends go? Again Taoshiro said nothing, making Yoriyuki get even more annoyed. I'm trying to be nice here. Seriously, you gave us more at Harjan than you are now. With no response still, Yoriyuki quickly tried to switch methods. All right, how about this? I'll ask a question and then you get to ask one if you give a decent answer. Good enough for you? The look in Taoshiro's eye said it was. Good, let's begin. What were you doing at Harjan Town? It looked for a moment that Taoshiro wouldn't answer. Yoriyuki was about to sigh and stand up before he suddenly spoke, speaking so quietly that she had to strain herself to hear him. We needed a boat. Yoriyuki frowned. A boat? Why the hell would you need a boat? I believe that was your second question there, said Taoshiro, speaking louder now. You moved to a new question relating to my answer, obviously meaning you were satisfied with it. All right, fine. Ask away. Can I have it back? Yoriyuki pretending to frown, but she knew Taoshiro was seeing through it. Give what back? You know what? Maybe the day you're no longer a dark mage. That'll probably be never, considering that, but what can you do? But it's my turn again. Why did you need a boat? Transport, said Taoshiro simply. We needed to travel somewhere. And you'd risk attacking such a populated place to get it? Don't answer that, I'm being rhetorical. My turn then. Taoshiro glanced towards Karen. Do you lot know where my friends are going? If we did, then why the hell would we be asking you? Yoriyuki sighed at Karen's answer, seeing the smirk appearing once more on Taoshiro's face. I see. Then you truly don't know that much. And here I thought you were after more specific stuff. I've had enough of these games. I won't answer anything else. This is your last chance to do this peacefully. We'll do this the hard way if you refuse to cooperate. You think that scares me? Taoshiro stood up from his seat before holding out his palm towards her, the fairy tale mark proudly being shown for all to see. I'm a fairy tale mage. Just go and do your worst. Yoriyuki didn't say anything, instead turning and leaving. Karen spared a glance at Taoshiro for an extra second before she followed out after her master, the door swinging shut behind her before Yoriyuki swiftly locked it. That could have gone better. We got something at least. We would have gotten more if you had kept your mouth shut. Hey. What was wrong with my answer? Don't you get it? Yoriyuki sighed as Karen shook her head. I see I'll need to teach you some of these kind of tactics if we get time in the future. In such an early stage you need to be careful of what you say. Both of us gave very little information that could be used. However, his intention was to learn of how much we knew, while we wanted to get as much as he could before he clammed up. When he realized we don't know anything, and he had gotten all he wanted, he felt no need to speak any further. But we know something at least, pointed out Karen. You said it yourself. Why attack such a populated place? If they took a boat, then it means they wanted to go somewhere isolated from the mainland. So peaceful negotiations failed then. Called a voice, enough authority in it to make Yuryuki miss a step as she tried to walk. Ah, it's you two. Quiljopi adjusted the round glasses on his face as he walked towards the two nearby Shinigami. Yuryuki noticed he had cut his hair short again, though a lot of it was hidden under that cap he wore. His entire attire was all white and military, a short white cape around his shoulders. That is no way to refer to a commanding officer, Miss Shihaoren. I am a general after all. Well, I don't call us Hein or the others that, so why would I do it for you? She glanced at the man behind Quilj, trying not to stare at the mask covering the lower half of his face. I'm surprised you are here as well as not. Normally you would be out on missions rather than here with us normal people. As Nod didn't bother answering her, instead holding out a hand. The keys. We have important work to do. Yuryuki felt a shiver go down her spine. You're taking over the interrogation. It seems my fellow general here has said too much, said Quilj, bringing a finger to his lips. Silence is golden after all. Good day, ladies. Taking the keys from Yuryuki, the two men entered the cell, the door swinging shut behind them before locking. Yuryuki scowled as she looked where the two men had gone before dragging Karen away from there. Those two unnerve me, said Karen cautiously. They always seem so dedicated to their job. Is Hein, Shunsui, and Byakuya have similar faces, though Byakuya's is more of a full-time thing. They just always bother me. Especially as Nod. I recognize strong mages and he never struck me as one in comparison to some of the people I have met. And yet he makes me feel unsettled around him and I can't explain why. I'm glad I'm not the only one who feels that way around him then, admitted Karen. I just wish they didn't interact with Yuzu so much. There was no choice, muttered Yuryuki. After all, I could only teach her so much. The best people to teach a Quincy would be Quincy themselves. Karen nodded her head as the two left, neither able to hear the screams coming from Taoshiro's cell despite being so close. Protector of the fairies. It's my fault, said Mikao as he sat on the edge of the ship with Wakaba. His longtime friend blew out a bit of smoke before he took the cigar out of his mouth to speak. Honestly? You can't blame yourself for this. How could we have expected the goddess of Flash to be there today of all days? Any news on that wouldn't even travel fast enough as she'd be faster than the actually news. All info on her whereabouts always ends up being outdated and this was no exception. We just got unlucky. More than just unlucky. Mikao spared a glance at the rest of the mages on the ship, noticing the depressed look many of them had. Everyone sees it. Taoshiro was our strongest mage. I may be the master but only in name and experience. Strength is an entirely different story. Taoshiro had already suffered a critical blow a year ago and now it's even worse. Well, that's just life sometimes, said Wakaba, infuriating Mikao. You can say that so freely about one of our comrades. I'm our reality, muttered Wakaba depressingly. We need to consider many things to survive. You are the man to keep the guild hopeful and to keep walking forward. And I am the one to point out the paths unsafe to walk along. It's the role I've come to take in order for us to all survive. I have to accept the reality of things. Then tell me, what do we do know? What paths are safe to walk down? Wakaba laughed though there was no humor to it. Barely any. I'm hoping this all pays out, else Taoshiro sacrificed himself to them for nothing. If our friends and allies are still alive, I'm sure things can change. We'll have a chance to turn everything round. Maybe even get some peace and quiet after it all. We're fairy tale. Peace and quiet is unlikely to happen. True that. Wakaba glanced towards Nab on the wheel. Any progress, Nab? Nab shook his head sadly. We're still a few miles out, I think. This ship isn't particularly the fastest, so I can't give anything more than vague distances. I'm recognizing places though, so we must be close. Guys. The group turned to face Jet, who was leaning dangerously far out of the crow's nest of the ship. There's something up ahead of us. Something's appearing. Appearing. Muttered Mikao in confusion. His mind instantly drew conclusions from what he knew before he rushed off, giving orders in case it truly was some kind of large sea creature. Wakaba let out small sighs, brought his cigar back to his lips. He always found Macau was better with this kind of stuff when he was faced with danger. Peaceful moments made him think far too much. But that was what he was there for. What else could he do as the man's friend? As they got closer, however, they quickly learned that what they were approaching wasn't a sea creature or a magical beast, but rather a surfacing ship of some kind. Macau frowned as he tried to make out who it belonged to before it finally finished surfacing. None of them were sure of what to do, but Macau didn't let them allow their guards to drop. They had to be ready for anything. Slowly a hatch on the top of the small ship started to open before a black-haired man pulled himself out of the opening. Macau froze in fear as he recognized the man, and he knew many of the others around him were feeling a similar thing. Byakuya Kukaki, a general of the Rune Knights. They couldn't win against such a foe. Taoshiro was strong, but this man was on another level, having years more experience over Taoshiro. Thinking of Taoshiro caused Macau to feel his heart clench as he solidified his will. It was pointless to think such foolish thoughts. They were fairy tale. They had come here for a reason, and he refused to allow it to end here. Right before he could shout out an order, a mop of blue hair shot out of the hatch behind Byakuya. "Hey, I told you to let me go first. I bet they think you're there to kill them or something. I was tired of being constrained by this small vessel. I was more than capable of getting here without it." "Yeah," said Mistogan, "but you'd cause a lot of attention to be drawn to you. Got to be careful after all." "Mistogan?" asked Macau hopefully. "Is that you?" "Ah," said Mistogan happily as he jumped out of the ship and down onto Macau's. "It's good to see you again, Macau." "Well, technically it would probably be Master now though. You're actually alive." "Wait. You thought I was dead?" "Well, you were gone for 7 years," Mistogan reminded Wakaba, crossing his arms slightly. "Didn't even contact us, and now it seems you are with the people who want to arrest you." "Huh?" Mistogan glanced at Byakuya before he realized what it appeared like. "Oh, I'm not with the Magic Council. I guess you could say Byakuya is here to help me, though he hadn't really expected to see you guys here, I think." "I didn't really, or at least not this early. It was a surprise, to be honest." "You got any food on here?" asked Doran Bolt, already sorting through a few bags before he pulled out an apple. "Perfect. Nozomi didn't bother buying food." "Well, that or she already ate it. I swear, that woman's metabolism is ridiculous." Macau did a double take as he noticed the man near them. When did he get there? He certainly hadn't been there a few moments ago. "Doran Bolt is a teleporter," said Nozomi as she stuck her head out of the ship she had been in. She seemed to be struggling to get out, and it became apparently when they saw the start of arms being wrapped around her waist. She finally pulled herself out before almost dragging out a pink-haired woman after her. "This is Mirti, if you remember." "I remember," muttered Macau, observing the woman. She had grown over the years and seemed much more confident than the shy girl she had been when they met 7 years ago. He would have technically forgotten that they had even met if not for the other events of that day. Because of that, he remembered every single detail. "I assume you are here for the same reasons that we are." "Of course," answered Mistogan quickly. "Why else? I've been waiting years for this." "Years? You knew? Well." Mistogan seemed a lot more awkward as he tried to speak with the glare on him. "How should I put this? I didn't know as in proof-wise. But I just couldn't believe what we had come to see as the truth. Well, I've had a habit from running away from things I can't accept, so that isn't too surprising for me, but you get what I mean. I never stopped thinking they might still be alive, and now we'll see that it wasn't my mad delusions." "Might want to calm down a bit," said Doran Bolt. "We're not there yet." "We heading for the island?" asked Droy. "It's where Levi and the others were last." "Of course. We'll dash." Doran Bolt suddenly grabbed the rail as the boat suddenly started tipping, hit by a massive wave. All the mages took a grip onto something before Doran Bolt quickly teleported away, going back to the ship he had come on so they wouldn't lose it. "Nozomi!" shouted Mistogan. The woman quickly nodded as she held out a hand towards the waves. A large disk of energy appeared between them and the ships, and the waves that crashed into it vanished. With a safer position on the ship, Nozomi quickly shifted the energy into smaller forms to make a perimeter around the ship, using the barrier to also fire back out the waves being absorbed. The cigar dropped from Wakaba's mouth as he started at the magic in action. Now that's some powerful stuff right there. It was easier for me to learn, said Nozomi, ignoring the shocked looks she got from that statement. I was proficient at it in Edalas, and the theory and practice here was relatively simply to begin with and to progress to the advanced tiers. Easy, she says, muttered Jet in shock. And yet she ignored all the easier stuff out there to move to an extremely advanced branch of magic. Mistogin leapt onto the edge of the ship before he brought a hand up his eyes to stop anything getting into them as he stared off into the distance. I can see it. Something's causing the waves and it's coming from over there. Doran Bolt, I know you can hear me, so watch the boat. That's where Tenro Island was, stated Byakuya, joining Mistogin at the ship's edge. Do you think it's them? No doubt about it. The position, the timing, it all makes sense. No wonder no one found them. They've been submerged underwater for the past 7 years. A light chuckle escaped Mistogin's lips. It's always the last place you look, isn't it? Let's get to them then, said Mikao as he started seeing the golden light coming from the water. Let's go get our friends back. Protector of the fairies. Taoshiro tried to hold in yet another scream, but it was for naught, the sound still escaping his lips despite his attempts to not give the two men in front of him the satisfaction of hearing him in pain. They only seemed to get amused by his actions, or at least the man with the glasses did. He had no idea about the one actually doing the torturing, as the masked man didn't even speak. There was barely any life in those eyes. The two men had introduced themselves as both generals and his persuaders, tasked with making him talk. Yuriuki, it seemed, had truly been the peaceful method, and these two were now trying to do what she had failed to it. The man practically observing him had introduced himself as Quiljopi, even going as far to claim that he was the warden of the prison he was in. The man had done something the moment the door had shut as well, all the walls glowing brighter, almost like a second layer of bars were tracing across them. The other man, as Nod, was someone he truly was coming to despise and slightly fear. The man barely said a word, even having to be introduced by his companion instead because he refused to say anything. He just seemed to watch his reactions, and even then didn't do much beyond that until he started the persuasion attempt. They had first resorted to a few quick strikes and he had actually spat at them for that. That was probably a bad move, as Nod had actually shown a brief emotion for a second before he hid it back away. Anger. The fists had quickly switched to a small blade and he hadn't been able to stop the first cry of pain as it stabbed into hand. He couldn't help it, as he hadn't even expected it. After that the methods had been switching to breaking a few of his fingers, as Nod unexpectedly knowing exactly how to cause the most amount of pain from each break. As the latest of the pain lessened, Quilj stepped forward towards him again, ready to try this time and get some answers. Well then, that makes all 10 now, doesn't it? Are you willing to tell us where your friends have gone now? Taoshiro hit Chugaya. Taoshiro glared at him defiantly, which only caused Quilj to shake his head. Such pity. I can't deny you have great mental fortitude so far. You are much more resilient than the majority of people we get sent to play with down here. Of course they are all far weaker and few have any bonds that link them to one another. Bonds like those became quite easy to break, am I right? I'm not going to tell you anything, said Taoshiro, spitting at the man. Quilj scowled as he wiped off the disgusting liquid from his face before shooting a glance at Nod. The man tilted his questioningly before nodding, silently leaving the cell and passing through the door as the bars of blue energy that had blocked it bent to allow him passage. Taoshiro couldn't help but feel a mixture of curiosity and wariness as he sat there in silence. He debated trying to attack Quilj while the odds were more in his favor, but the cuffs he had around his wrists would make that far too hard, especially when Quilj would still be able to use magic. That, and he wasn't even sure how to get those bars out of the way. They reminded him too much of the cell that held Ichigo in Edalas, only far stronger than that. He didn't even hear Nod returning until the man stepped through the door, the bars moving to allow him entry before snapping back into place as the door swung shut. Rage filled Taoshiro as he saw what the man was holding in his hands. Hyorin Meru. This is a nice blade, said Nod, speaking for the first time as he slowly drew the blade from its sheath. I want it. That's mine, snarled Toshiro in anger. Hyorin Meru is not yours. In response to Toshiro's words, ice spread from the blade, forcing Aznad to release it or get frozen to the blade. A snarl came from under his mask, but a hand shot up in front of him to stop him doing anything rash. You should be more careful, stated Quilge as he looked down at the blade on the ground. It is not so easy to touch a Zanpakuto without its owner's permission. Carefully taking off his cloak, Quilge used it to wrap the hilt of the blade as he picked it up before taking it over to a table to one side of the room, knocking the food and water off it that had been supplied earlier in the day without a second care. He quickly withdrew his cloak before wrapping it back around himself, not wanting to freeze from how long they could end up being in the cell. You Shinigami have such a wonderful bond with these blades. A piece of your soul in the physical plane of existence. Quite an achievement this was by the man who made the first Zanpakuto. They even act viciously to those seen as threats, as Aznad just proved to us. So? What's your point? You are going to wish you were more patient, stated Quilge before he let his hand fall to one side and drew a rapier-styled sword from its sheath. Blue-colored energy glowed around the blade as he rose it up, and Toshiro realized what he was about to do. Stop. It was too late as Quilge quickly swung down, the blade causing Hyorin Meru to snap in half and for Toshiro's eyes to widen in an almost invisible pain. That special connection you have, that connection you cherish, it is also a weakness for you right now. Quilge reached for the sword and picked up one half of the blade, eyeing it carefully as he held it up to Toshiro's face. I doubt I could normally shatter this blade so easily, but your magic is being suppressed far too much to focus it correctly, especially when your Zanpakuto isn't even in your own hands. The weaker condition you are in as well, the more the pain can affect you. I wonder if I can get you to release it to a higher level. How much it would hurt you to have it shattered then? Gritting his teeth, Toshiro schooled his expression back into a defiant glare. Do your worst. Oh, we plan to. I thought I would announce the starting act, so to speak. But why don't we jump right into the meat of the play? Aznad, if you would. Toshiro turned just in time to see Aznad generating a large ring of thorn projectiles around himself, glowing a bright blue as they floated around the air. On command they all snapped towards him before a first one went flying forward. As restrained as he was unable to avoid the strike as it stabbed into his foot and pinned it to the ground. A large scream went through his mouth. The pain was much more intense than anything else. He tried to prepare himself for the next strike only to find none coming, Aznad looking at him with an expression similar to glee in his eyes. Did you know that all Quincy are gifted with a specific ability? Asked Quilge. Like a Shinigami can imprint their soul on a Zanpakuto, our abilities can be influenced by our own souls as well. My ability is known as the jail, for example, for obvious reasons. Now my friend here, he has a much more dangerous ability. The fear. The fear. Toshiro shivered involuntarily. Was it just him, or did it feel colder in here now? He was actually shivering, and he never shivered. Ah, it's begun. Yes, said Aznad. It has. What has? Toshiro found himself asking, finding it hard to look at Aznad. He tried turning his attention more to Quilge, but some part of his mind was afraid to let him lose sight of Aznad. It was unsettling. The fear. Aznad reached out towards Toshiro only to have the man flinch out of his grip, the action causing Aznad even more happiness. Can you feel it spreading through your body? Can you feel your muscles starting to freeze? Your heart speeds up, ice-cold terror flooding your veins, your eyes constantly scanning wildly for danger. And that danger is me. I'm impressed, really. Most people die after one hit. The heart simply shuts down. Toshiro's breaths started happening quicker and quicker, feeling exactly what Aznad was describing. His eyes were playing tricks on him as he watched the man become a hideous horror, and he swore he could feel something horrible on his body. He looked down only to try and withhold a scream as his appearance seemed to change to his eyes. His chest was exposed and wires seemed to rest on his body, new restraints holding him down. His eyes shot upwards as a laugh sounded and he saw him. Mayuri Kuratsuki. Now, Mayuri said as he reached towards him, a glowing orb in his hands. This may get a bit messy, so please try and hang in there. I wonder what reaction we'll get from you, little Shiro. Before anything else happened, Toshiro was snapped back to reality by a sudden intense pain. Quilge looked at him before holding up a new snapped section of the blade. More painful, right? Now are you willing to tell us about Fairy Tale yet? Normally silence is golden, but right now I would appreciate you telling us where they went. Screw you. I see. As Nod, continue. As Nod stepped back towards Toshiro before more thorns stabbed forward and into Toshiro, causing another large burst of pain from each wound. The fear that followed was like nothing he had ever felt, and he didn't even realize when it ended, his voice hoarse from all the screaming he must have done. His eyes looked up fearfully at Asnod, which only seemed to excite the man further. Where is Fairy Tale going? I won't. I won't. Toshiro couldn't even manage to stutter anything else through the fear before it intensified once more. Where is Fairy Tale? Terror and pain intensified until Toshiro found himself almost ready to fall out of his chair and curl up on the floor. He suspected he would have done so already if not for the thorns in his limbs. He could barely focus at this point. He just wanted it to end. Why couldn't it end? Yes, said Quilge softly, a reassuring hand brushing against Toshiro's cheek and causing the man to flinch. It can all end here if you want. All this pain and suffering can disappear. You want that, right? A predatory smile spread across Quilge's face as he saw Toshiro's head slowly dip down and back up. Very good then. Now why don't you tell me, where is Fairy Tale? Despite the part of his mind screaming at him to stop, Toshiro's mouth still opened and uttered the words he wanted to protect. Tenro Island. I see. The destroyed paradise belonging to the fairies. Quilge smirked as he grabbed Toshiro roughly by his chin and pulled him up slightly, pain ripping across Toshiro's nerves from the wounds being aggravated. Very good, Toshiro. That's right. Now just one more. One more question and it'll all be over. Anything. Please. Stop. Tell me, is he on that island right now? Where is Ichigo Kurosaki? Protector of the fairies. Closing the book he was reading, Uriah looked up as his father entered the room. There was a subtle frown on his face as he saw what he was doing, so he quickly put the book away within his coat, hanging on the back of his chair. Ryukin's expression softened a bit, but it still was nothing more than a frown at best. That was always how his father was, however. Harsh and cold, with the occasional show of affection hidden beneath it. As he neared the table, Ryukin placed the plates down between the two of them, a small meal prepared for the both of them. Despite having moved out years ago, Uriah still found himself being invited around frequently for a meal, even if it sometimes was nothing but awkwardness and silence. It had been better at times, but that was when his grandfather had still been alive. It had been even better when he had been a kid and his mother had been alive. It seemed each person he lost made these meals that bit less friendly to him. His father started eating first, Uriah taking that as an invitation to start eating himself. He didn't let up on his manners, knowing if he did then he would have to deal with that annoyed look on his father's face, and, while it didn't bother him that much, having to deal with the aftermath was a pain and far too time-consuming for his liking. His family weren't nobles in the typical sense, so as a child he had always found the lessons annoying. His mother, a woman he had inherited a lot more of that from his father, had always been patient with him. His father had been the more detached sort and left things a lot to her, though it hadn't bothered him too much. He had inherited a lot from her, including his black hair. He wished, however, that he could have inherited his father's hair at times instead of his poor eyesight, but at least black hair was less noticeable than white. He had been forbidden from talking much about the lessons outside of the house, but that had never been a problem either. His family had been very well off compared to the rest of the people nearby. He was either the spoiled rich brat to the other kids or the easy payday to them. Even as a child he had been able to see through them, so talking to them about that kind of stuff was easy to avoid doing. And they weren't even capable of using magic, so it wasn't like they would have been able to understand the tales of his family. He did like to take pride in his lineage. Not many could claim they were from a long-stretching clan of mages, and it was made even better when you noticed how every single one of those mages had been a Quincy. Magic had been in his blood from his birth. Uriah was brought out of his thoughts when his father finally broke the silence. I assume you have been progressing well on your jobs. What guild are you in again? Lamia scale was it? Yes father, muttered Uriah, hearing the scorn in his father's voice. Out of everyone in his entire family's history, Ryukin could be considered to be the oddest Quincy of them all. A Quincy who rejected his heritage, and yet was also one of their strongest Quincy to be produced. He was jealous at times, but then he remembered he was also ranked up there and that emotion disappeared. Still, his father had never wanted him to join a guild if he was to continue being a Quincy. He had wanted him to join him in his profession as a doctor, believing he could put his talents to better work there. I see. I suppose you have been careful with attracting attention on these missions of yours. And here was the hard part. Explaining to his father he had somehow attracted enough attention to have drawn Ubababe-sama's eye. Actually, the master seems to be very impressed with my efficiency. It seems likely she will try and get me to take a place on the team for the next Grand Magic Games. Ryukin froze for a second, his fork hovering just in front of his mouth. He quickly continued like nothing was wrong, but Uriah could see he had surprised the man. And made him annoyed. Most things did that. That is the opposite of not attracting attention. You do realize the louder your presence becomes, the more likely you are to fall. Just look at Fairy Tail. And look at people like Jura. Figureheads that are too hard to remove silently. The world of guilds is not a friendly place when the Magic Council is breathing down everyone's necks. Not even an old family like ours would be safe, despite all the work we have done in our long past. And what is the opposite? Hide in the shadows and hide your strength. It worked for many before. It helped your cousin out for a long time too. The only problem for him was that Juashiro Yukatake start to favor him. Look where he is now. Buried at the bottom of the sea. In case you forgot though, Ichigo isn't dead. To the world he is. He might as well be. You are the only person in the world who can actually sense his presence, in case you forgot, and even then you said it was like a tiny dot compared to the massive flood it normally is. Draw attention to yourself and you will end up as he did. Dead. Ryukin shook his head in annoyance as he saw Uriah frown. I've given you my advice. Whether you listen to it or not is up to you. Do what you like. Uriah went back to eating, ignoring the looks his father was subtly giving him. He hated it when he was judged like this. It was his life, so why did his father feel the need to judge the choices he made and declare them all to be wrong? It was times like this when he missed his grandfather, but the old man had finally died 3 years ago, leaving no one to talk to freely like he had used to with his grandfather. As he was about to take another bite, he froze. The fork fell from his grip and clanked against the table, but for once he didn't care if he had to listen to his father going on about manners again. His eyes had grown wide before he quickly excused himself, grabbing his coat as he walked as fast as he could toward the doorway. The moment he was out of sight he broke into a run, wrenching open the door and not caring as it slammed shut loudly behind him. Using bursts of Hiran Kyoku he sped away from the large mansion and traveled as far away as he could from all sources of civilization. Only when he was truly sure he was alone did he fall back on his senses and reach out for what he had just felt. The tiny dot of energy, always found at the back of his mind, had grown, if just by a tiny amount. Any sign of change though was unprecedented. It had been unchanging for the past 7 years. So you're finally going to show yourself, are you? Asked Uriah, speaking out loud to the air. It's about time, Ichigo Kurosaki. Now the games can truly begin. Protector of the Fairies. The False Blade. Mavis gently strolled across the large skyscrapers of Ichigo's inner world, tapping her feet against the glass in a cheerful rhythm as she hummed along to it. She tried not to look to the side where the being only known right now as the Hollow was chained up against the ground, held down by many swords of pure blue energy with a large set of chains added for good measure, made of the same material as the swords. By the Hollow stood the man who had introduced himself as Zanjitsu. She wasn't too sure what to think about the man, but he was decent for conversation at least. His cloak was ripped in a lot of places from his battle with the Hollow to get it to submit, and the glasses he wore were shattered too. Normally his appearance would have reverted to normal by now. It had been 7 years since then after all. The problem was that Ichigo had yet to leave this place. She supposed the other Shinigami, Shinji, and Kisuke, would have had a similar situation, only less focused. It would have been more like a dream perhaps, and everyone else would have no idea what would have just happened. She let her feet take her to where they always dragged her to, finding Ichigo sitting in the same place he always was. The only problem was that he never responded, his head eternally stuck looking at the sky above him, or what seemed to be this world's sky at the very least. The only difference she supposed from what it had been before she appeared was that it now held a large amount of golden light, that same light flowing freely all over the place. Ichigo never took his eyes off it. He probably didn't even realize his own surroundings. That was kind of her fault, to be honest. He was meant to be partly conscious when she activated Fairy Sphere, and he had been, but he had been ready to collapse all the same. The only way to guarantee the barrier's continued strength during the remainder of Acknowledge's attack was to siphon off some of the barrier's energy into a secondary one around Ichigo to freeze him. It had worked, just a bit too well however. She had cast the spell but she couldn't bring it down without Ichigo's consent. Letting herself fall against Ichigo's back, she swung her arms around his neck and leaned over one shoulder to join him staring upwards. "Can you hear me yet, Ichigo?" There was no response but she hadn't expected one. Still, it hurt. She didn't like to be disappointed, especially having been forced to wait 7 years longer than she had originally planned. Not when he had already accepted her. "Well," she muttered softly, "it doesn't matter if you are or aren't. You've kept this barrier up for a long time. Far too long, but it's not your fault. You protected everyone after all. Now let go. Let go and return to the world out there. If you don't do it willingly, that's fine too. You're at the limit of how much magic you can absorb from around you." The first sight of movement flickered on Ichigo's face before his head slowly lowered, looking away from the light he had stared into for the past 7 years. As quickly as it happened he vanished, a sign that his consciousness had returned to his body. Mavis smiled happily before waving at the two people nearby. "Well, I'll going after him. See you guys later." Zanjitsu gave her a brief nod before she too vanished, appearing in the normal world as the small barrier around Ichigo broke apart into specks of light. She looked around at the larger barrier and saw it was doing a similar thing, only the problem was that it was still all submerged underwater. It seemed Acknowledge had knocked Fairy Sphere down so far before the final parts of Fairy Sphere had locked into place below the island, and the island had decided to settle there as its locked position in space. It couldn't stay like that anymore. Tapping into the island's reserves, she borrowed the power in order to make the island get directed upwards. There wasn't enough for anything like Fairy Sphere, but something simple like a pushing spell was easy to achieve with the amount of sources of magic on the island, even if the links were wounded and the island itself had a large mass. It was just in time as the island managed to break the surface before any larger holes appeared in Fairy Sphere's disintegrating shell. Already water that had leaked in was draining away through small cracks and the sun was shining down on the island for the first time in 7 years. A few sources of magic seemed to light up on her senses, sources she figured belonged to the Shinigami who would have recovered the fastest. There were others too. Approaching ones. Coincidence? Unlikely. If it was, then that would be far too boring. She quickly took a seat down on the air as she folded her legs beneath her, looking down at Ichigo as she waited for him to open his eyes finally. "What's happened in 7 years?" she asked herself, an amused smile crossing her face. "It's going to be fun to find out, right, Ichigo? Protector of the fairies." Lahar glanced among the assembled men, seeing eager faces amongst the crowd of rune knights. He wasn't surprised to see such faces. Not when they were finally going to catch one of the biggest enemies of the Magic Council. The entirety of Fairy Tail, all in one place. It was like it had been wrapped up in a nice little bow for them. The chairman had been unable to meet him in person to give him his orders on such short notice, but he had passed on messages through the super archive. An entire fleet had been given for this operation. At least 300 rune knights were on board the 10 ships they had, along with a strong crew for each ship not counted in that number. But more than that, he had been given supreme command over them all. Every single one of them, even including the 2 generals also assigned to the force. Quiljopi and Desnod had been very insistent from what he had heard, begging and demanding the right to join the operation. The chairman had relented in the end. What could he say to dissuade 2 of the strongest people in their employment? But even they had rules to obey still. They had freedom to act how they saw fit, even to commandeer large groups of troops, but they would have to obey his will on this mission. He was the magic chairman's representative, he was the man's voice, and so even they would not be allowed to interfere if he deemed them unable to. Not that he would unless they went off the rails. Quilge was a proud man, but he did listen to orders. As not, however, the man was a wild card in his eyes. Too much madness hidden beneath the surface, and not enough loyalty to the Magic Council to counteract it. If it had been as Nod coming alone, then he doubted the chairman would ever have agreed. Quilge's presence, however, always made as Nod calm down, at least enough to listen carefully to orders. As he watched over the last preparations taking place, he saw Quilge approaching him slowly, the man keeping a watchful eye on the troops just like he was. "There's much less order than I imagined." "That's to be expected," answered Lahar carefully, not wanting the men nearby to hear him speak. "We have a large number of troops, but we're short on time. We basically grabbed as many as we could spare from nearby areas and got every ship in the nearby area too. You and Asnod are the only two from the main compound, and I'm the only one from the Magic Council. Us generals are quite fast individuals. It is a shame fewer people share that trait." Despite the pity lacing Quilge's voice, Lahar knew the man felt nothing of the sort. It was in the man's eyes. He was proud of the ability that he had. "I must ask, how did you get a hold of Fairy Tale's location? You did it in record time." Not even the chairman expected results so quickly. He seemed convinced the Shinigami recently captured would not break so easily. All people break. Perhaps he simply had a very good surface disguise, but was actually quite fragile once it was stripped away. Besides, does it matter? We have Fairy Tale's location, though why they are going to where Tenro Island was is quite the mystery. After all, nothing is there, right? "Of course," said Lahar, noticing the mix of mockery and suspicion in the Quincy's voice. "Why? Do you know otherwise?" "Not at all," said Quilge. Just remembering a few words the Shinigami muttered, "when he wasn't begging for mercy, of course." "You don't think I took his word for it that they were going to Tenro Island, did you?" "I had to be sure." He swore it was true many times, even admitting it had been hidden. Quilge smirked as Lahar accepted the lie, amused that it actually worked. Truthfully, the Shinigami had been reluctant to part with any more information, but the things they did get were enough. "Very well then. I've assigned you command of the left wing of the fleet." "Only 2 ships? I assume you have given the same out to my comrade." "Asnod has command over the right wing. The rest is left to me." "And if we fell under attack? How would we deal with such a thing with our weaker numbers?" Lahar didn't back down to the man's words. "Are you saying you two are not strong enough to substitute those numbers?" Quilge smirked, backing down. "Very well then. We shall defer to your command. I should get the troops under my command into some form of proper order. Honestly, the low-ranking troops we have never show any sort of organization." Lahar let the man leave before he refocused on the task at hand. It was only an hour later when they finally managed to set sail, and it was likely they wouldn't even reach Tenro Island before nightfall. Still, that was useful. They could use the cover of night. As the ships pulled away from the port, a solitary figure who had been watching turning and left in a burst of speed. He had only gotten a mile away when he sensed someone following him and, after recognizing the presence and realizing it wasn't an enemy, slowed down to allow them to catch up. It was a completely unnecessary thing to do, considering it was Yoryuki that was following him, but it was the action itself that mattered, not if it was necessary. He raised his straw hat at her slightly as she arrived, a greeting on his lips. "Fancy seeing you here, Yoryuki. Disappointed you couldn't go with them?" Yoryuki scoffed. "Hardly. Those ships would have been far too slow for my liking anyway. A woman like me can't be constrained to such a speed." Shunsui chuckled. "Well, that is a good point you have, though it isn't what I meant. If you wanted to, you could have easily gone on ahead. And yet here you are, following me, and I doubt you plan to head back there to follow them." "It's not my business what happens to Fairy Tale," said Yoryuki, trying to shrug off Shunsui's questions. Shunsui, however, wasn't one to let up when he had an opening. "Certainly not, that I can agree with. However, correct me if I'm wrong, but they talked about going to Tenro Island." If that island has truly returned to this world, there is a chance the occupants might have too. I'm honestly surprised Ashine isn't already heading there, but I suppose he has to play it carefully at a time like this. Aren't you the same? You are Ashine's friend after all. His son's survival must interest you in some ways. Never knew the kid much. Just what Ashine told me. But he is Kisuk's apprentice. There's some sense of interest from that, I won't deny it, but I'm in no rush to find out. But what about you? Why are you here, Shunsui? And without Nanao too? I'm surprised. Oh, you know me, said Shunsui jokily. I was just passing through. There is some excellent things to drink if you know where to look, and Nanao can't confiscate it if I drink it before she can find me. I was keeping an eye on you, Shunsui. You were doing the exact same thing I was watching. Now was I. Shunsui took a step towards her cautiously, leaning in as if he was going to impart some great secret. Now what exactly was I watching? Come on, we both had our fun. Not a what, but a who. I see, said Shunsui, dropping all pretenses of silliness from his act. So you have been having similar thoughts to myself. Quiljopi and as not. Let's face it, neither of us trust those two. Of course we don't. But they have served the Magic Council faithfully for many years now. They have had a much longer career than Byakuya, for instance. And yet you can sense it. The feeling on unease in the air. The feeling of change. Shunsui nodded. A dangerous thing sometimes. There are linchpins in this world, and there are people who play pivotal roles in keeping it all together. I fear for the future if things continue as they are right now. Juoshiro probably would have too. Memories flashed before Shunsui's eyes, but he quickly suppressed them, more than willing to deal with them later. Keep an eye on Ashine for me if you can. Make sure he doesn't do anything rash. Probably worth keeping a bit of an eye on his daughters until they head back to their guild again. Don't want to make the situation any worse now, do we? And you? Asked Yoriyuki. What do you plan to do? I've got a few things to check up on. Shunsui made a shooing motion with his hands. Go on ahead, I'll be back within a day or two. Hopefully I'll have avoided most of the chaos that's going to happen then too. Chaos? What chaos? The powder barrel you'll all sitting on, of course. And those men that left on those ships are the match to light it. There's a reason the chairman was reluctant to make a move against Fairy Tail until the incident at Tenro Island. I feel like there's going to be a front row seat to what he was talking about. Protector of the fairies. My, said Kisuke as he picked himself off the ground. Now this is a new experience. Damn, muttered Shinji as he did the same. He glanced around as he felt his grip empty, and continued to do so till he finally found Sakanade on the ground beside him. He carefully picked up the blade before returning it to its sheath, Kisuke having done the same with Benihime. It seems we are the first to awake, Kisuke said softly as he glanced among the group of collapsed mages. Isn't that interesting? Why is that, I wonder? Ichigo, said Shinji quickly, panic setting into his voice. Which way did he fall? Which way was it? This way, gestured Kisuke as he started walking. Leave the others. They are in no danger here, not that I believe you care about their safety. I do find myself curious on where Acknowledge has gotten to. None of the damage I expected to see is here. I honestly believed we were all done for. A painful way to go out, but there wasn't anything left to stop it. And yet here we are, alive. Who cares why we're alive instead of dead? I'm just happy that we made it through that. Shinji paused as the memories flowed back to him. Acknowledge. You really didn't want it, noticing Ichigo. And when it did, its entire attention shifted. We were all ants to it. No, we were less than that. And yet it went after Ichigo purposely. It called him something. What was it? Shinji scratched his head as he frowned. Damn it, what was it? Hybrid. It called him a hybrid. It knew about his inner hollow. Kisuke's silence was infuriating to Shinji. Did that mean yes? Did it mean no? He knew the man knew, the panic he had shown had proven that, but why couldn't he say? And why the hell had he shivered at the word too? He hadn't done that with the word hybrid before. If you want to know, then I'm sure you'll learn soon enough. You noticed the odd things around Ichigo in case you forgot. You were observant enough to create a few pieces of the puzzle. That's more than most can say. I told you before, I have no idea what you are talking about. And I told you before, you can pretend all you want. No one else is here to hear you now though. No one but me, the one who actually understands and holds the majority of the pieces. Shinji frowned. The majority? Not all of them. Kisuk couldn't help but laugh. No, not all of them. Not even I can grasp them all because I'm a scientist, seeing something new for the first time. I'm approaching unknown ground, and it's all very fascinating to me. Well, it's not very exciting for me, muttered an exhausted Ichigo as he appeared before them, looking completely shattered. Shinji wasted no time in running towards him, criticizing his choice to fight Acknowledge alone while looking for any signs of injury. Kisuk however hung back, using the distance to properly analyze the situation. Ichigo's Bankai had vanished, and the low amount of magical power Ichigo was giving off suggested he had run out at some point and that had dispelled it. It solved the approaching problem, but it had probably gotten Ichigo ready to be flung back into his original situation. Ichigo's Zanpakuto was slung over his shoulder and, while he wasn't sure about the sword, the sheath had a lot of damage done to it. He didn't want to know how damaged the blade was if this was the sheath's condition. Apart from the exhaustion, however, Ichigo showed no other signs of injury. It must have been the temporary ability to access his hollow powers again, which meant any damage he had taken against Acknowledge had regenerated before his Bankai ended. Still, the question of how Ichigo had lost all that magic was a curious one. One he would have to find out later. It's good to see you're okay, said Kisuk as he walked forward. The moment he was within range, he snapped out with his fist, sending a heavy hit against Ichigo's face. With all the exhaustion he was feeling, Ichigo could do nothing to dodge the attack and was sent tumbling to the ground. Shinji was already drawing his Zanpakuto when Ichigo held up a hand to stop him. Don't. I deserved that. That you did. An apprentice of mine is no idiot. Besides, what we just talked about moments before. When Acknowledge appeared, you latched onto the fact there was an enemy, despite knowing you wouldn't win. If anything, my warnings should have alerted you to that. And yet you continued, no quarrels with giving up your life in a worthless fight. Sometimes you need to live, no matter the cost. Running away in fear won't help anyone. And neither will dying a pointless death. Kisuk sighed as he joined Ichigo on the ground. I suppose we should continue on from where we left off before. Ichigo frowned. From what I remember, you were talking about a Zanpakuto. Not just any. Yours. Ichigo nodded before he withdrew the blade from its sheath and held it in his lap. It was covered in cracks, and it was a miracle the blade was even holding together. Strangely, it didn't even seem to heal despite being in a sealed state and Ichigo having the magic to fix it. Is this because of my Bankai? Because it broke. There's no choice about it, said Shinji in annoyance. Don't worry, there is a solution to this. How? A Bankai cannot be fixed dash. By normal means. But remember what I reminded you of. It can be fixed, but only one man can do it. You should remember him. I doubt there is a single Shinigami currently who doesn't. Aoesu Nimeya, the god of the sword. If Shinji was waiting for shock, then he wouldn't get it. Ichigo just continued to look at the man blankly, the name not ringing any bells. Come on, muttered Shinji. How can you not remember that guy? Dark-skinned, black hair on the top, green hair on the shaved sides. It still didn't seem to get a rise from Ichigo. Gold trim on some of his stuff, a stupid white puffer jacket for crying out loud. Very energetic. Hold on, said Ichigo, recognition starting to appear. He's Dash. You've got it. One of the four gods of Ishgar, right? And with that, all hope Shinji had that Ichigo had gotten it flew right out of the window. What the hell? How can you dash? Ichigo's not wrong, said Kisuk, butting into the conversation. Aoesu's been in the Wizard Saints for a long time now, even if it is more for the purpose of keeping track of the goings-on of the wider world. And the Magic Council don't complain about that because it means they can monitor the location of such a powerful individual and not have to worry about him being a rogue element. I see. Ichigo glanced back at his cracked blade. So he can fix Zanjutsu, right? For crying out loud! Shouted Shinji, his patience at wit's end. How can you not remember Aoyasu? He's the man who made your Zanpakuto. No one would forget that, so how can you? Made my Zanpakuto. Ichigo frowned before he looked at Kisuke. Is this related to the shattered shaft method? I didn't think things were that much difference for me just because I had a parent who was a Shinigami. Shinji looked between Ichigo and Kisuke with a face full of disbelief before it slowly morphed to something else as he let his eyes rest on Kisuke. Suspicion. What did you tell him? Nothing, answered Kisuke simply. I instead let him make his own conclusion. It is not my fault if it was the wrong one. What's wrong? Asked Ichigo. What the hell is up with you two? Ichigo, how did you get your Zanpakuto? The serious look Shinji was giving him made Ichigo pause for a second as he tried to figure out the best way to explain it. Well, I remember Kisuke stabbing me and helping me unlock my Shinigami powers. Then I passed out and, when I woke up, I had my Zanpakuto. I see. Shinji turned his head towards Kisuke. Did you give him an Asashi? It's not beyond the realms of possibility that you found one. I think you already know the answer. Tell him then. Tell him the truth. Tell him the goddamn truth. What the hell are you two talking about? Ichigo frowned at them, trying to work out the secret meanings hidden in their words. Just come out and say it already. What is wrong with my Zanpakuto? I never gave you an Asashi, Kisuke stated softly. You created your Zanpakuto with your own magic. I know that already, said Ichigo in annoyance. And what's wrong with that? It's wrong, interrupted Shinji, because that's not possible. A Zanpakuto is not something that can be created through raw magic. It must be forged from your own soul. Hell, the way you're talking is as if you made a... Ichigo scowled. Made a what, Shinji? Shinji gulped. As if you made a Quincy blade. A Quincy blade. Memories flashed before Ichigo's eyes as he remembered the Edila's version of himself. Like his. Yes, stated Shinji, knowing exactly who Ichigo was referring to. But I don't get it. You shouldn't be able to do that. It's not right. You're not a Quincy. You're... Shinji froze as he remembered Acknowledge's cry. A hybrid. I think you're understanding now, stated Kisuke. An Arrancar is not a hybrid. A Vizard is not a hybrid. A hybrid is, by definition of magic, someone who belongs to all the disciplines of a path of magic. Every strength gained, every weakness covered, an impossible ideal and yet still entirely possible under the right circumstances. Hang on, said Ichigo. I think you're thinking too much into this, Kisuke. I'm not. I'm not. Kisuke's gaze softened as he saw Ichigo struggling to argue against him. A Shinigami for a father, a Quincy for a mother, what better chance was there ever for their child to be special? It still shouldn't work, argued Shinji. If it was possible, then why aren't there more Shinigami/Quincy hybrids running around out there? Because there can't be. Kisuke grabbed Ichigo's arm before pulling up the sleeve, revealing the faint cracks along Ichigo's skin. Breakdown of the body because the magic inside him is trying to fight against one another. Quincy magic and Shinigami magic cannot exist in one body. Ichigo, you once asked me why I took you as my apprentice all those years ago. It was because I decided to even before then. The reason I can no longer help you with this now is because I already stopped this once before. After all, there was only one way to stop the two types of magic from trying to wipe each other out. To add in the last of the three and let the cycle become complete. You fused the hollow into me, muttered Ichigo. That how it appeared. But when? Why? The why is easy, said Kisuke. Because of your father. Dad. Shock and betray crossed Ichigo's face. But why? I don't understand. I don't expect you to. Not completely. To begin with, you need to understand why there has never been a Shinigami/Quincy hybrid. The two magic are like polar opposites at times. There have been situations like yours before, where one parent was a Shinigami and the other was a Quincy. When the child of the two is born, he or she always has both for the first few moments of their life. Kisuk sighed. Then they fight. They fight for dominance. They want to be the one to win, so they give it everything they've got. And normally the side that wins depends a bit on which of your parents was stronger, but that only happens when there is a large gap between the two. Most of the time the Shinigami side wins, even if the parents were evenly matched in power. It's because it is easier for that power to win at such a young age, and once it takes root then it can beat back any Quincy magic that tries to invade. The time it takes to do all this can vary, but the longest record was a day. A single day till it was all decided. What about me? What? Did Dad just bring me to you the moment I was born and try and make sure I had both? Nothing of the sort, said Kisuk quickly, denying the statement with a rapid shake of his head. He came to me 6 months later, with you almost dead with cracks covering your entire body. He continued despite the shock spreading across Ichigo's face. You see, there were those that the magic couldn't beat the stalemate with. They all died within a week of being born. You had that conflict inside you for 6 months and yet you were still alive, if just barely. And there is Hein was, down on his hands and knees and begging me to do anything so long as I could save you. That's what the hollow was for, muttered Shinji. To stabilize Ichigo's core. Exactly. A hollow can gain either the powers of a Shinigami or the powers of a Quincy. I already knew a Shinigami could gain the powers of a hollow, and, while many accounts say it wasn't possible, I reckon there is a way for a Quincy to gain a hollow's power. The hollow is the middle group. The buffer zone to make sure that the two could interact safely. By giving you hollow powers I forever made you into a hybrid, the first of your specific kind I might add. What I did wasn't like beating the odds. What I did was probably not even possible. In some ways, you are the child that should never exist. After all, no child should have survived as long as you did. I shouldn't have existed. Kisuk moved quickly, already hearing the despair in Ichigo's voice and knowing he couldn't let Ichigo focus on that. He reached out and, like he did when Ichigo was his young apprentice, patting him on the head reassuringly as he ruffled his hair. Perhaps. But I saw something interesting that day. I decided back then, that child would be my apprentice, no matter what. Ichigo slowly looked down at the blade on his lap. What about Zanjutsu? He saw Kisuk look away. Kisuk. A blade made of energy, muttered Shinji next to Ichigo. A Quincy blade, not a Shinigami one. I have to ask Ichigo, who have you been talking to all this time? Ichigo clenched the blade he was holding tighter, a faint trail of blood falling from his clenched hands. No, I know he's Zanjutsu. He has to be. He's not, muttered Shinji. I didn't tell you this back then, but you should know now. When you fought your inner hollow, you didn't do anything on the outside. You were just sitting there. It was like you'd entered Jinzen. You're lying. You know I'm not Ichigo. You said it yourself. You said it talked to you. You said it seemed like it was trying to teach you. A single memory flashing through Ichigo's mind continually, repeating over and over again. A single line from so long ago now, and yet he remembered it as clear as day. I am Zanjutsu. The hollow had screamed it at him back then, always so angry when he denied it. The hollow couldn't be. No, it couldn't be. You're wrong, muttered Ichigo. It's not true. You can't ignore this, said Shinji as he grabbed Ichigo by his shirt and pulled him up. You know what this means. Why won't you just accept it? Then who the hell has been talking to me all this time? Ichigo roared at him, breaking free of Shinji's grip and backing away. Zanjutsu's always been there. He's always been helping me. He's told me his name so many times. He's Zanjutsu. If he's been lying all this time, then who the hell is he? What the hell was he teaching me? What the hell was his purpose? None of us can answer that, Ichigo, responded Kisuk. All I know is that he's been suppressing your power for a very long time now. Didn't you feel it when you fought recently? I could sense it myself. You dropped to nothing and then shot back up momentarily. He's been very good at pushing your magic so far down that you would never be able to even realize it was there. You knew. Yes. From the moment you made a blade for yourself, I knew. That something had fashioned you as Zanpakuta to fight with and yet at the same time had made your power sink. This was your limit? Nonsense. A child who can destroy a hollow with his raw magical power would have ended up far stronger than this by this point. Ichigo's eyes shot to Kisuke, fear and suspicion in his eyes. You said I would become your apprentice, no matter what. My mother. You didn't. She lost her powers before she saved your life, Kisuke replied softly. I was not responsible for that. You didn't say you didn't kill her. No, Kisuke muttered. No, I didn't. But I created the tool that did. I was the one to teach the humans the spell to turn them into hollows. I was the only who created the creature who killed your mother. I may not have done the deed myself, but I still orchestrated it all. I'm the one who caused the death of your original world, and created your endless cycle of trying to replace it. I killed Masaka Kurosaki. Protector of the Fairies. Fairy Tail, united once more. As the boat slowly came to shore, Byakuya was the first off it. The island was just as he remembered it all those years ago. A complete mess. It's all the same, he muttered. Nothing's changed. Shouldn't things have regrown by now? Asked Mirti, joining Byakuya by his side. I mean, surely the damage should have started recovering by now? It's been 7 years. It's hard to tell. The barrier that was protecting this island isn't like any I have ever seen. I couldn't even sense anything coming from it. What kind of magic was it to not even be able to be detected? Let's worry about that later, said Mistogen as he joined the two, his eyes scanning the beach they had pulled up onto. Can't you sense it? I can. A large number of magical signatures just lit up in the area. I recognize quite a lot of them. Some of them are even. Byakuya's voice trailed off as he spotted a sight on the far end of the beach. Men dressed in white and blue, the weapons the rune knights used by their sides. The boats that had docked at Tenro Island to transport the wounded years ago was there too. He had always wondered about the wreckage that they should have created all those years ago after Acknowledge's attack, but he had chalked it up to the blast being so powerful that it completely destroyed everything. Now it seems there was another reason the wreckage hadn't been there. Go on, said Mistogen, seeing the shocked expression on Byakuya's face. They're your men, aren't they? Go to them. Thank you, muttered Byakuya before he vanished in a burst of shunpo. Mirti let out an annoyed huff before she started running towards the figures in this distance. I can't believe he forgot me. Why do I have to walk when he can get there in a second? Mistogen chuckled as the woman chased after her master before he turned his attention to the other mages present. Everyone finally disembarked from the ship. Some had already started wandering further into the island, already tracking the magical signatures they could sense. Nozomi joined him by his side before they both did what all the others were doing. As they let their senses spread out, they focused on the one person they were looking for. They schemed over probably every mage till they finally managed to lock onto Ichigo. There was a presence with him that they didn't recognize, and his magical power was lower than they have ever felt it, but it still had the feeling Ichigo's magic normally had. So as everyone else heading towards where the majority of Fairy Tail was, they split off, heading towards Ichigo. In the end, they ending up meeting him as he was walking towards the others. A broken sword was held loosely in his hands and his eyes looked so dead, but it was still him. A sign of recognition appeared in Ichigo's eyes as he saw them before he slowly spoke. Mistogen. Nozomi. Happiness unlike anything he had ever felt filled him at hearing Ichigo's voice. After so long, he had truly been right. He hadn't been wrong to run away from what had been said as the truth. He immediately found himself dropping down to one knee in a bow, and he could see Nozomi doing so as well next to him. It's been a long time, sir. Welcome back, my prince. Protector of the Fairies. Gildarts shook his head slowly as he looked off the edge of the cliff face. Even after Mikao and everyone told him they had been gone for 7 years, he still couldn't believe it. It was just so strange to think about. For them it had been like the blink of an eye, and that hurt to think about when he considered how the others must have felt. The patience and loyalty to the guild they had to stay for so long despite losing most of the guild's heart was incredibly high. It was times like this where he truly was proud to be a member of Fairy Tail. The sound of someone approaching brought him out of his thoughts, and he glanced over his shoulder to see Kana, standing a fair bit away from him and hesitantly approaching. Ah, Kana. Does the master want me for something? Kana slowly shook her head. Actually, I was hoping to speak to you about something. Gildarts frowned before he gestured for her to come closer as he took a seat and slung his feet over the edge. Come and sit down then. No point standing around if we don't need to. Something seemed off. He knew what Kana was like and he knew she got a bit nervous around the time of the S-class trials. Only then though. He'd never seen her this nervous any other time, except a few times when she was younger and was around him. He couldn't blame her back then. He was an intimidating fellow because of how strong he was. Kana dropped to the ground next to him lightly but refused to look at him, instead focusing on the wide open view before them. It seems the master won't be promoting anyone this time. It's to be expected, Gildarts said gruffly. Grimoire Heart really messed it all up for us this time. I mean, look at the state of Tenro Island. Mavis must be rolling in her grave at such destruction happening to her precious home. Yeah, muttered Kana. Can any of this be fixed? Hard to tell. Natsu's flames did even more damage than Grimoire Heart, but we can hardly blame him for that since it only happened because of how far he got pushed. We may have to get some professionals to fix it up. Makarov and I have a few old contacts who may be able to do something about it so it at least recovers for future generations. I really wanted to make it this time, you know. I wanted to finally make it. Hey now, don't get so down about it. Being S-class isn't the be-all and all kind of thing. There is plenty you can do without having that kind of title. All it does is let you take some tougher jobs and increase your reputation, and that can be a pain itself half the time. I mean, look at all the stuff Ichigo has to put up with because he took that Wizard Saint title. And look at the standards Urza has to keep showing to the world. She can't afford to fail if she doesn't want to make Fairy Tail's reputation take a hit. If you ask me, you can do without the additional pressure. It wasn't about that, muttered Kana, clenching her fists in frustration. I needed to be one. It was the only way. Gildarts frowned. Do you want to talk about it? Kana didn't move for a while. Finally though she hesitantly nodded, looking towards Gildarts slowly. It's about my family. My mother, well, it's hard to tell if she would approve or not of some of my life choices nowadays, but she told me once that she wanted me to meet my father. Those were some of her last words to me when I was 6. I'm sorry, muttered Gildarts softly. I know what it is like to lose someone close to you. I once had someone I cherished and lost, though it was my fault that I lost her. She left me and I learned years later that she had died. Did you ever meet your father? Kana nodded slowly. Yeah. He wasn't what I expected. He was strong too. So strong that I wasn't even sure he would accept someone as weak as I was in comparison. I was far too weak to ever be recognized as his daughter. I couldn't tell him the truth. Not until I became strong enough to be worthy of being his daughter. And you decided the best way to rate your strength would be to become an S-class mage, said Gildarts, getting another nod from Kana. That's ridiculous. What did you say? Asked Kana, outraged. I worked years at this, and you have the nerve to tell me it's ridiculous. Of course it is, said Gildarts as he crossed his arms. If you were trying to become an S-class mage for such a weak reason, then of course you wouldn't be able to make it. You weren't fighting for your own sake, you were fighting to try and be accepted by someone else. Your father should be able to be proud of you no matter how strong you are. You're his daughter after all. Gildarts had hoped to try and cheer the girl up a bit. He hadn't expected to see her start crying and he desperately tried to fix his mistake. Now hold on, he muttered, hesitantly holding the girl as she grabbed him in a large hug, burying her head in his chest. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. Come on now, cheer up. I'm not sad, Kana muttered, her voice muffled slightly from Gildarts' cloak. I'm happy. Happy. The man. He's you. Gildarts froze and Kana felt it. His grip around her weakened and Kana pushed herself out of his arms as she looked up at him hesitantly. I didn't know how to tell you. I had no idea what to do. I mean, I had plans to when I first came to the guild. I even met you at the door, remember? He did remember. Kana had been tiny then and he had given her a small greeting as he passed because of how curious she seemed about the fairy tale guild. He had even told her to go in if she wanted to and to not worry about being so shy. I heard about you there. They said you were strong. They're ace even. Guild Arts of the West. No wonder she had gotten scared to say anything. That name was one spread far and wide because of the power he held. He was one of the biggest names out there at the time, and had been Fairy Tale's current strongest member outside of the Master. I planned to tell you when you came back from your job but you took a while. He always did. His jobs were long because he liked them like that. They became tougher and made things so much more interesting than normal short jobs. Kana smiled and attempted to laugh a bit. I guess I got a bit scared, you know. The pressure got to me. Had she really been wanting to tell him this for years? Each time he went away, each act he did to increase his reputation further, did it just make it even harder for her? 12 years she had been in Fairy Tale. Did that mean he had put such a weight on her shoulders for those 12 years? Don't worry, Kana added, not noticing any reaction coming from Guild Arts. I don't expect you to change how you act. I just needed to say it. Just once, you know, so I could finally move forward. Thank you for listening to me, Father. As Kana tried to pull away, Guild Arts reached out and caught her in a large hug. Why didn't I realize? You don't need to blame yourself, said Kana reassuringly. It was my fault for never telling you. How could you have known? I should have, muttered Guild Arts sadly. You're Cornelia's daughter. You're my daughter. I should have known. I should have been able to tell from just looking at you. How would you even know? Mum said she left you 18 years ago, before I was even born. You can't be blamed. But if I hadn't worked so much, if I had shown how much I loved her more, I could have met you so much earlier. It's not your fault. I'm not telling you to try and guilt you here. But it ate up at you inside, Guild Arts whispered, not able to speak any louder as he felt his eyes watering. I caused you to experience that pain. I caused your suffering. From now on at least, can I have the right? The right. The right to love you. The right to be your father. The right to make sure you never have to experience that loneliness again. Kana felt her eyes watering again as she twisted herself to return the hug. I'd like that, Father. Protector of the Fairies. Ichigo rested quietly at the edge of the camp, sitting alone as he watched everyone else rushing around and chatting. He wanted to join them, to ask where Toshiro was and why he wasn't here right now with them, but he didn't. He couldn't even bring up the energy to move or to open his mouth and ask. Are you okay, sir? Asked Miss Dogen as he approached the Shinigami. You don't want to celebrate like the others. It's been 7 years, Ichigo muttered. I don't feel like celebrating that much. I see. Nozomi slowly walked up to the two as well, a few plates of food in her hands from where the others had been cooking up small meals for everyone. She handed one to Miss Dogen before handing a second to Ichigo, leaving herself with 3 plates barely balancing on her arm. She looked at the look Ichigo was giving her before she tilted her head. What is it? Ichigo shook his head. Never mind. Seems you still have a big appetite, Nozomi. The woman nodded. Yes. My magic can be quite taxing at times, even when I only use it a small amount. It doesn't help that I was once from Edalis. The original Miss Dogen never had this problem, I believe, because he never had a physical core to store magic in. An unfortunate side effect that I've learned to deal with. It could be much worse. You sure it isn't anything more serious? You could always go to a doctor or dash. We've tried that, said Miss Dogen, interrupting Ichigo before he could finish. The problem is what we told you before. We're not exactly labeled very nicely these days. Why the hell did they even do that? Muttered Ichigo in annoyance. You were meant to be under my protection. I was, stated Miss Dogen. And then you died officially and that protection was declared invalid. I have Byakuya Kukaki to thank for my freedom. He warned me after we saw Tenro Island get destroyed. Wait, you were there? Not exactly. Miss Dogen gestured over his shoulder towards Laxus, the man talking with his grandfather to one side. Laxus made a bit of a commotion when he turned up unannounced, looking for the master. He rushed to Tenro Island straight afterwards and we followed, fearing what had made him rush back so quickly. I see then. Ichigo shook his head. I never liked the chairman much. Juoshiro was so much better. Ichigo watched as Mistogen and Nozomi both flinched. What's wrong? It's about the old chairman, Nozomi said hesitantly. You see, we're not exactly legal in the eyes of the law. We created our own little group and do our own thing, and that means we do end up hearing the more confidential and hidden information the public doesn't and shouldn't know. One of the things we found out was about the old chairman, said Mistogen as he took over. He's listed as... Well, you know. I understand, Ichigo muttered sadly, looking down at the ground. So Juoshiro's dead, is he? I can't believe that guy is gone. Was it his illness? He always had a weak body because of his condition. We're not sure, said Nozomi with a shake of her head. We couldn't go to his home either to confirm anything because the files hid his location very well. We were lucky to learn what we did before we were caught. Apparently the Magic Council doesn't like people breaking into their offices and reading confidential files. I see no reason why they should have complained, added Mistogen with a smirk. We did disable all the security alarms and traps so at least we didn't accidentally make the office blow up. We might have as we left, said Nozomi as she thought back on the event carefully. I remember explosions. Wasn't us. They just had a bit of bad aim. Or maybe it was very good aim and we just had teleporters with us. You two have been through a lot, said Ichigo as he watched the two interact. I have to ask though. Why did you leave Fairy Tail? I understand you Mistogen to some degree, though I'm sure others would have fought tooth and nail to help you, but why did you leave Nozomi? You weren't in any danger. I had no place there, stated Nozomi simply. I would have been a stranger at that guild. I didn't want that. If I had to be anywhere, why not go with Mistogen and be around someone who could at least relate to me in some form? We both owed our current lives to you after all. You don't need to, Ichigo argued. Your lives are your own. Mine shouldn't even interfere with yours. But it can if we desire it so, said Mistogen to counter him. Besides, it's not like staying in Fairy Tail would have ended up any better. The Magic Council declared them a dark guild after all. They did what? The sound of Ichigo's voice caused everyone to pause and look towards them, seeing Ichigo having dropped his plate to one side and was grabbing the front of Mistogen's suit with his hands with a wild and angry look in his eye. You're lying, Ichigo muttered pleadingly. Tell me you're lying. I felt the same myself, responded Mistogen. The Magic Council is a dangerous organization. Not a day after everyone disappeared, the Magic Council arrived at Fairy Tail with a warrant to arrest every single one of them. A fight broke out and all of Fairy Tail made a run for it, but it was too late to try and plead leniency. They had been declared a dark guild before the first Rune Knight stepped into the guild. There was silence from everyone before a bit of nervous laughter escaped Macao's lips. Ah, maybe we should have mentioned that a bit later, Mistogen. Ruins the festivities a bit. Is what he said true, Macao? Asked Makarov as he slowly stepped towards the man. You said you became the fourth master of Fairy Tail if I remember correctly. Was that a lie? Well. Macao rubbed the back of his head nervously. Not really. Fairy Tail is honestly still the same. We just do less small tasks and instead fight against dark guilds and leave them for the Magic Council to pick up and throw them in jail. We may have lost a bit of our spirit on the way, however. And a lot of members didn't want to keep the Fairy Tail name, but I can't really blame them. We didn't want to give it up, despite the risk, but others did. We didn't want to lose the thing that had bound us all together. You're a fool, muttered Makarov with a sad smile on his face. But then when were any of us not? Well, it doesn't surprise me much that the Magic Council would eventually try to get rid of us. The tension at the Wizard Saint meetings from the chairman could be suffocating at times. That's not all, I'm afraid, muttered Macao. We couldn't stay in Magnolia, but a new guild took residence there. How's that a problem? Asked Laxus as he crossed his arms. Isn't that to be expected? I mean, it's a shame, but the guild was our home, not the town. No, it's not that. They took the guild hall and made it their base. Makarov's eyes widened a small amount, but Macau wasn't done. It's worse. The ones who took our home. I think you know who they are, master. Who else would take our home and degrade it further? Raventail, snarled Makarov. Ivan, you foolish son of mine. What have you done? I'm sorry, master, said Macau, bringing a hand to his eyes and rubbing some of the tears at the corners of them. We couldn't protect our home. It's gone. You wrong. Shouted Natsu from one side. Our home's still safe. Natsu's right, added Urza as she placed her hand over her heart. Our home is where our comrades are. A building is a mere shell, something that can always be built elsewhere so long as our bonds exist. They're right, said Makarov as he let his arm extend to pat the man on the back. You did a good job, fourth. The first would be proud of you. Ichigo smiled slightly as he saw everyone trying to cheer up the older mages before he finally glanced over his shoulder quickly and shot the girl behind him an annoyed look. He quickly turned back and hit it, but it didn't stop Mavis from poking his cheek repeatedly. Hey, listen to me already. Come on, Ichigo, listen to me. Hey, Miss Doggin, Ichigo called out, trying to ignore the outraged tone Mavis's voice took as he continued to ignore her. This may be a bit rude, but would you and Nozomi mind leaving me to think for a bit? I need to let some of this sink in. Miss Doggin and Nozomi gave a short bow, much to Ichigo's annoyance, before they quickly departed. Ichigo adjusted himself so he could rest an elbow on his knee and used his hand to cover his mouth before he finally spoke again to Mavis. What is it? Finally. I can't believe you were ignoring me for so long. I was trying to talk to you. Well, I can't just go ahead and speak normally now, can I? Muttered Ichigo, keeping his voice quiet so no one else would end up hearing him talking to himself. What do you think people would think if they saw me talking to thin air? You could say you were speaking to your Zanpakuta spirit. Won't work. Laxus and Levi know me well enough to see through the lie, and Shinji and Kisuke are Shinigami themselves. Not only that, they both know the guy I've been talking to isn't my Zanpakuto. Kisuke as well is far too knowledgeable and would realize something is wrong and would wonder who else I could be speaking to. You could tell him about me if you want, suggested Mavis. I don't care too much. It's not like he can do anything to me. She looked round at Ichigo's face and saw the look of annoyance from her suggestion. What's with that look? You would have told him in the past. My past self didn't know he caused my mother to die. My past self isn't furious at him right now. You could have killed him if you wanted, said Mavis as she jumped over Ichigo's shield and spun in the air, landing gently in front of him and smirking. He didn't even move when you stabbed your sword straight at his head. He would have let you kill him, and I know those kind of people. They don't do that for just anyone. Hell, barely anyone would allow themselves to be killed just to satisfy someone's need for vengeance. It wouldn't have changed anything, muttered Ichigo. He still remembered that anger, but it had mostly been clouded by betrayal. He had thrown himself forward with everything he had only to stop with the blade mere millimeters away from Kisuke's face, the blade shaking in his hands. He had quickly brought the blade down on the ground with enough force to shatter it in half before he did anything he felt he might regret later when his mind actually became clear, and he hadn't waited to hear anything else. He had run off till he was far enough away, and it was only then that he had run into Miss Doggin and Nozomi. As for Shinji and Kisuke, the two were around at the edges of the camp like he was. Shinji kept giving him cautious glances, as if checking he was all ready, while Kisuke simply had most of his face hidden by that hat of his, so it was hard to tell what that man was thinking. Never mind him, Ichigo quickly said. What were you so insistent to speak to me about? You kept bugging me even more after what Macau mentioned. I wasn't probably listening, so I want confirmation. He said the guild hall was taken over by another guild, right? It's just a guild hall, Mavis. Like Urza said, it can always be rebuilt elsewhere. That's not the point, snapped Mavis. There's a reason I had Fairy Tail built there. If Raventail found it, then dash. Found what? What are you telling me? Mavis shut her mouth and covered it with her hands. I'm not saying, she said, her voice muffled. Not until you take me there to check on something. There is an entire guild now occupying that place, said Ichigo in annoyance. How the hell am I meant to take you there? Take who where? Ichigo jumped as he heard Levi's voice beside him, leaning in curiously with a worried look on her face. Are you talking to yourself? Have your symptoms worsened? Blame it on that, called out Mavis, but Ichigo ignored her, choosing instead to focus on Levi. Nothing, just thinking a bit out loud. Don't worry about it, Levi. Are you sure? Levi slotted herself down next to Ichigo, still looking at him curiously. Your Bankai's ended, she noted, staring at him curiously. Does that mean your Zanpakuto has decided it's safe now? Ichigo couldn't hide the anger that quickly appeared on his face, making Levi flinch at how much rage was on his face. Apparently Zanjutsu has been acting out for a long time now. Everything he's told me, I don't even know how much of it is even true anymore. Every lesson he gave me, every advice he had with kind words, I don't even know what was fake and what wasn't anymore. You've gotten into an argument with your Zanpakuto? Asked Laxus as he joined the two, hearing the tail end of Ichigo's rant. What did him or you do? Ichigo clenched his fists tightly. Zanjutsu. Apparently I've been wrong this entire time. The man who I believed to be Zanjutsu has been lying to me for a very long time. Ichigo reached to the sheath on his back before pulling out the broken blade within and stabbing it into the ground in front of him. How can I fight with a blade that hasn't even been truthfully with me? How can I put my life in his hands if I can no longer even face him? Levi frowned. What did he do that was so wrong? Was it that he lied about his name? Didn't you hear me? I said dash. Levi's exactly right, said Laxus as he cut Ichigo off. You're mad because you caught Zanjutsu in his lies, but aren't you only truly mad because he tricked you? And yet you are ready to abandon everything he taught you. How can I even trust anything he even said? Levi shrugged next to him. I would. Seeing Ichigo's angry look, she quickly expanded on her point. Zanjutsu has been at your side all this time, right? Your Bankai didn't vanish to begin with because he still thought you were in danger. The way I see it, Zanjutsu truly does care for you. Can you really throw his lessons away so easily? She's right, you know, said Mavis over Ichigo's shoulder. I have a few chats with that old guy. A Zanpakuto can't fake emotion as well as we can because they are truthful representations of a soul. He truly does care for you, more than anything else in the world. Ichigo glanced down at the sword in front of him before hesitantly reaching back out for it. He could feel that familiar sense of warmth as he gripped the hilt in his hands, but it didn't feel like it normally did still. It felt like a stranger. Who are you, Zanjutsu? Ichigo muttered before sheathing the blade back away. Levi smiled next to him as he reclaimed his Zanpakuto before quickly bursting into a new tale to distract him. She quickly twisted herself to show off her guild mark on her left shoulder blade. Ichigo and Laxus looked at it in confusion until they finally noticed what was wrong. The mark had shifted slightly, morphing into a new longer shape with a large loop around most of the main mark. Edges of the mark had increased and become much more elegant than before. What the hell is that? Asked Laxus as he leaned in closer to brush a hand across the mark. Levi jumped away at the contact, shivering. Hey, that tickles. I'm just looking at the mark already, said Laxus in protest. Keep still. Levi slowly moved back as Laxus took a closer look, Ichigo shooting a glance towards Mavis in the meantime. Mavis followed his gaze back as he turned towards Levi and smirked. Oh, that? A little gift I gave her. She told you about it, right? How I helped her. She needed a bit more strength to finish the fight, so I blessed her with some holy light. That's the mark of fairy glitter, said Laxus finally. How the hell did you get something like that? No one has been able to use that spell since the first time. I don't know, admitted Levi. Someone spoke to me during my fight and helped me out. I assume this is what she meant. She's not the only one who had help, said Ichigo, holding out his left palm to reveal a winged version of the guild's mark. Laxus looked it before his eyes widened. I recognize that one. That's Dash. Fairy sphere, muttered Levi. Laxus looked at her in shock before she blushed from embarrassment. I may have snuck into your room a few times when I needed to borrow more books. It was mentioned in one of them. And you didn't recognize fairy glitter. Hey. I can't see the mark very well. How was I meant to know? Laxus sighed before he glanced back at Ichigo. Does that mean you were the one to activate the barrier around the island? Ichigo put a finger to his lips. Keep quiet about it, will you? I don't really want any recognition for this. Not when I caused us to miss 7 years. It's not really a victory when that's the end result. You still saved us, said Levi. That counts for something. She's right, added Laxus. Acknowledge it. That dragon was terrifying. Speaking of which, what possessed you to charge at that dragon? Did you want to get yourself killed? You all needed time to escape, said Ichigo in protest. I was just trying to give you that time. Levi crossed her arms angrily. We were really worried, you know. You should have waited for us. We could have all fought together if we were going to fight. That dragon was tough though, Laxus muttered. I fused fairy law into my ultimate spell and it still wasn't anywhere near enough. He noticed how 2 pairs of eyes snapped towards him. Ah yeah, I can fuse fairy law into a spell. Useful, right? You make such a big deal out of my fairy sphere and Levi's fairy glitter and you forget to mention what you did with fairy law. Laxus shrugged. Well, you already knew I could use it, so it isn't as impressive. A thought crossed Laxus's mind before he broke out into laughter, causing the others to stare at him funnily. What the hell is the matter with you now? Sorry. It's just amusing, you know. The people that made up Team Fairy now are the ones to know all 3 of Fairy Tail's legendary spells. Levi smirked as well. It is pretty amusing when you think about it. Who did you fight anyway? Was it Hades? The master definitely didn't, because of his condition, and the fact you showed up injured means you were fighting. Laxus chuckled. Yeah, that old guy was a tough one. His magic had no end and he kept getting stronger. So an evil Ichigo. Hey, protested Ichigo. That's an unfair comparison. No, she's pretty much spot on, stated Laxus. He was extremely tough. I couldn't even win with everything I had to begin with. He kept shrugging it all off. But I found his source. A machine that continuous supplied him with magic. Is that even possible? Hard to tell, said Levi, though Mavis simply nodded instead as she spoke to Ichigo. It's completely possible. Such a device is very complex, however. I'm surprised a human such as him could have obtained it. I still don't truly understand why he did this though, said Laxus sadly. He even tried to say we were the same at one point, both wanting to create a more ideal world. Ichigo shook his head. You are nothing like him, Laxus. You shouldn't think as such. I don't worry. The things he said bothered me though. He said the true nature of magic was darkness because Ziref was able to enter somewhere called the Holy Palace. Laxus paused as he saw the shocked expression on Ichigo's face. Ichigo. I'm sorry, Ichigo said slowly. Could you clarify that a bit more? Did Hades really mention somewhere called the Holy Palace? Laxus frowned but nodded all the same. Yeah. If what I remember is correct, Hades said he found this holy palace somewhere on his travels. Said it was a place of blinding light and magnificence, and this was just from the outside of the place alone. He tried to enter however and lost the sight in his right eye. Serves him right, said Mavis as she crossed her arms. The holy palace doesn't accept just anyone. Only the worthy may enter. Ichigo almost turned round at her words to face her, pausing at the last second. His movements however caught Laxus and Levi's eyes, causing them to both frown at him. Ichigo. It's nothing, said Ichigo, trying to play his actions off as nothing. Go on. Laxus frowned still but continued. He said he had been there at just the right time because the doors had opened for Ziref, not him. Ziref then imparted onto him secrets hidden within the holy palace and gave him his right eye. You need to find Precht, Mavis said urgently. Find him right now. Ask where Laxus left him. Say Laxus, said Ichigo slowly, trying not to let his voice reveal the urgency he was feeling. What did you do with Precht? Where is he now? He's on the beach, of course. Laxus pointed over his shoulder in the direction where he had left Hades. He's still alive but he's probably unable to move freely. Laxus paused as he took in Ichigo's words more clearly. Ichigo, Why did you call him Prect? Ichigo flinched. What do you mean? That's his name, right? I don't remember saying his name. I only called him Hades. Ichigo, how did you know who he was? Ichigo shook his head as he got to his feet. Look, it's not important right now. We've just got to check on him. Don't want him causing Laxus didn't let Ichigo get any further, grabbing him by the front of his shirt. What aren't you telling us, Ichigo? You can't just brush this off. It's nothing, Laxus. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry. You're my best friend, goddammit. Isn't it part of my job to be worried? You're causing a commotion, Ichigo muttered, noticing how eyes were getting drawn back to them. Just leave it for now. I promise I'll tell you and Levi later. Just trust me for now. Laxus glared at him for a good minute before finally letting go. Fine then. But I'll expect a proper answer next time. You'll get one. Don't worry. With that, Ichigo quickly walked away from the others, trying to not appear too urgent in his movements and doing his best to ignore the pleading tones of Mavis to move faster. If something could make that annoying girl panic, then he supposed it was worth panicking about too. Something definitely felt wrong. Protector of the Fairies. Byakuya walked up to the body of Grimoire Heart's master, looking at it in disgust. It was getting dark, but there was just enough light still out to get a decent look at the body, and he wanted this chance before he lost it and had to bring the body towards the rune knights nearby. There he couldn't show as much interested, but the body as well would have been disturbed from its original position and state. So this is what happened to the man who started this all. Mirti hung back a bit, not wanting to look much at her old master. His goals seemed honorable at the time. I suppose they might have, especially to such a young and impressionable child. Tell me, do you think he is right now? Mirti gave a small shake of her head. Then that is all that matters. I'm amazed though, she muttered as she took a step closer, almost afraid the man would suddenly wake up and lash out. He always showed off such strength and power. It's almost unnatural to see him in such a state. I mean, I knew he must have been defeated, but not dead. Never dead. His enemy was a fairy tale mage, said Byakuya, frowning. And his wounds aren't from that of a sword. He wasn't killed by any of the mages in this guild would I actually think would have gone through with the act. And even then, I'm not sure he should even be dead. Tell me, does he look injured enough to actually have died? Mirti slowly shook her head. No. He looks almost too peaceful too in his state. Like all the life just vanished from him as he was lying down. His position seemed too natural to have happened any other way. Indeed. At the very least we will have to take the body back with us. I will only break so many laws today, and I still have a duty to take such bodies back for analysis. Mirti nodded before her head picked up a bit and she turned her head towards the direction leading further into the island. Someone's coming. I know. That will be Ichigo. Byakuya took a step away from the body before he turned to greet the Shinigami he knew was approaching. Ichigo appeared a few moments later in a run, only slowing down when he realized he was being observed before raising a hand in the air in greeting. Yo, Byakuya. I see you still don't bother to give me the respect my position deserves, Ichigo Kurosaki. He noticed how Ichigo froze as he heard his surname. Mirti had done a similar reaction, looking up at him in shock as she pulled on his cloak. Kurosaki? Like General Kurosaki. The very same. Byakuya glanced back at Ichigo. Your father let it slip to me after the Nirvana incident. Did he now? Said Ichigo, laughing nervously, though Byakuya could see he was doing his best to hide how uncomfortable he was feeling. Just call me Ichigo, will you? I'll call you Kukaki if you want. Out of everything I could do, this is the one thing that would make you call me more formally. Byakuya sighed. I'm going to regret this, but there is no need. Call me whatever you want to. Ichigo nodded. Thanks. His eyes slid off Byakuya and landed on Mirti. Who's your friend? She looks familiar. A hint of recognition sparked in Ichigo's eyes suddenly. Wait, hold on, she's not Dash. I see you remember her then. This is my apprentice, Mirti. She got of the island? When? You had been taken out by the dragon, supplied Mirti. Doran Bolt then teleported me away to safety because of how terrified I was and how much I wanted to live. He was going to go back for you all but... I understand, Ichigo said, cutting her off. Not enough time. Even one person was more than enough. What are you doing here in such a rush anyway, Ichigo? Asked Byakuya as he eyed the Shinigami carefully. You showed no indication that you knew we were here until you saw us. Laxus just told me about Hades and I kind of felt the need to hurry and check out the situation. Can't risk the man getting back up, so we've got to make sure he's secured properly. I see. Then this only reaffirms my previous suspicions. It was not a member of Fairy Tail who killed him. Killed him. Ichigo wasted no time with rushing towards the body, leaning down and frantically checking the man's vital signs. He's dead? Who the hell killed him? I'm afraid we do not know. Do you have any ideas? Ichigo had none, but Mavis had other ideas. His eye, Ichigo, she murmured quietly. His right eye. Ichigo obeyed, pushing the man's long hair away to reveal his empty eye socket. He heard Mirti gasp in shock while Byakuya stiffened beside them both. Mavis only sighed though, as if the answer had already been obvious to her from the start. I knew it. Knew what? Whispered Ichigo, not bothering about the strange looks Byakuya and Mirti shot him. This was the work of Zeref. He took back his eye. Mavis sighed again. I had hoped we could have stopped him before he reclaimed it, but it seems we were 7 years too late. Zeref has already reclaimed a part of himself. Ichigo's eyes flickered towards her before back to the body, Mavis getting at what he wanted from her. He could barely speak to her while others were around, so he was trying to get her to interpret what he wanted. Luckily there was only one thing he could want at this moment. Clarification. From what I gathered, Zeref has gotten bored over the years. It happens when you live for 400 years. That has made him do strange things for amusement to try and pass he time, even if he never gets directly involved in the events that take place. He was on this island, you know? That's why Grimoire Heart came here anyway, and I bet Zeref found that quite amusing too. He told me he once gave away his eye to help an interesting human, and it seems we found out today who that human was. The thing is though that no one else would know whose eye that was unless Hades told them, and I doubt he would share such knowledge. The only person who would be close enough to take the eye and also want to take it would have to be the one who it originally belonged to. I assume you'll want the body? Asked Ichigo as he looked towards Byakuya. The man nodded, but there was a scowl on his face as he did so. Indeed. The chairman is quite insistent at times, and does not accept excuses very often. Things aren't as easy as they were 7 years ago. I heard. Fairy Tail's a dark guild now. I am sorry about that. I submitted my own testament to help, but it was ignored. Maybe now, with my men returned to me, they will listen to reason. Ichigo frowned as well. You think they won't? The chairman is a strict man, but he is also a ruthless man. Fairy Tail was a thorn to him 7 years ago, and has still been to this day. He stands to gain nothing from reinstating them, and the same applies to you and Makarov. You were, and still are, wizard saints. He could not take that title away from you two so easily with everything else that happened. Not when you both died in the eyes of the world, and there would be too many wizard saints who would have stood against such actions. The only reason they never acted on what happened to your guild is because they had to protect their own interests, and there was nothing they could do anyway. You think that previous influence will be enough? I do not know. I hope it might be, but this is an uncertain world at times. Sir. Byakuya looked towards Mirti as he heard the nervous tone her voice had taken. Is anyone else coming today? No. Why? Because I think we've got company. They barely had time to turn when the ships steadily approaching opened fire on the island, the ground around them exploding. Protector of the Fairies. Assault on Tenro Island. Byakuya looked out through the translucent barrier as the smoke cleared, the land between the barrier and the ships filled with large craters that water was starting to spill into from the sea. Byakuya let the barrier fade away before he grabbed Mirti and the two vanished, Ichigo following with his own burst of shunpo. Thanks for the save, Ichigo called out as they moved further away from the beach's edge. Explosions were happening around the area they had just vacated, and they would only get closer the closer the ships got. Don't thank me yet. Byakuya glanced carefully at the ships in the distance. Mirti, can you identify anyone on board with your Maguilty sense? I can try. Focusing carefully, she sent out a sensory link towards the people on the ship, making sure to not allow it to be detected in case it was who she thought it might be. She got at least 50 confirmations before she finally recognized a particular man's presence and withdrew. It's them. The Magic Council. And the watchdog is there too. Lahar. I should have known. Lahar? Watchdog. He's the chairman's voice in most cases, said Byakuya as he quickly filled Ichigo in. Lahar acts as the chairman's representative in times where the chairman cannot be there himself, which is a lot most days. He is also one of the few people who actually sees the chairman in person and is quite frankly the man's closest consultant because of that fact. Well, what the hell is he doing firing at this island? I don't know. They shouldn't know anyone is here. Why would they? Unless. Byakuya swore. Those fools. Byakuya increased his speed as he rushed towards Fairy Tail's location, Ichigo matching his speed to keep up. Hold on a second. What's the matter? Your older guild members. Did you not ask where Toshiro was? I can say for certain that he was with them very recently. In which case, why is he not here now? Why is the child, now a man, who idolized you every time he was nearby not here to see you once more? Ichigo barely had time to ponder on the question before they arrived at the camp, Byakuya marching straight to Mikao and grabbing him by his coat. Where is Toshiro Hitsugiya? Why isn't he here with you all? Mikao swore. It's the Magic Council attacking us, isn't it? Yes. Now answer me. Mikao looked away. He was captured hours ago in order to allow us to make our escape. But he would never have told them anything. They don't need him to do so willingly, you fool. The Magic Council will do anything to get the information they need, whether through invasion of the mind, a method completely ineffective when the person in question is a Shinigami with someone inside them to protect them, or through torture. And let me tell you, the second method is far worse because of one man. It doesn't matter how strong Toshiro's will is. He will break all the same, and he has done. A hand landed on Byakuya's arm before pulling his grip away from Mikao. Byakuya looked towards the source of the hand before seeing Ichigo looking at him with a dark look in his eyes. Did you say what I thought you said? Did they torture Toshiro? There is a time to get angry later. For now dash. To hell with that. Right now's a perfect time to get angry. We've got an entire fleet of ships coming at us after all. Perfect stress relief in my mind. Are you a fool? Doing so will only dash. Byakuya's voice was drowned out by the large screams of men further away and his head snapped in their direction. He let go of Mirti before he rushed away, hurrying towards the camp where his men were currently resting. Ichigo rushed after him and the ones fast enough to follow quickly did. The others were going to as well until Gildarts held out an arm to stop them. Leave them. We need to prepare our escape. Mikao, where is the ship you came on? It's not far away from where they are all heading. Gildarts swore. All right, we're going to have to rush. If you're not up for moving so quickly, then get others to carry you. We need to make it to the ship and fast before it gets blown out of the water. While the others rushed towards the boat's direction, Byakuya kept using Shunpo until he made it to his men. He was greeting, however, by pure destruction. The makeshift tents had been blown away in the blast and he could see bits of arms and other body parts scattered all over the place. He let any pretense of keeping calm fall from his face as he whipped his Zanpakuto from its sheath. So this is your decision, Chairman? That is fine with me. Enemies it is. I'm not going to complain with you, said Ichigo as he joined Byakuya by his side. He drew his blade as well before he paused and slowly sheathed it again. Instead he cracked his knuckles. I'm not going to be as useful as normal, but I've still got a few tricks up my sleeves. We're going on a rampage? Asked Shinji as he appeared by the others. He looked around the field of bodies before letting out a snarl in disgust. Well, for once I don't mind letting loose with those more hollow tendencies. Calm down a bit, said Kisuke as he joined the trio. We need to take this carefully. This, said Byakuya, from the man who already betrayed the Magic Council. Exactly. I didn't exactly do something like that on a whim. Really? Said Ichigo coldly, making Kisuke flinch as he realized what Ichigo was referring about. Your teacher's right, Ichigo, Laxus said as he arrived too, lightning flickering around his body. We've got too many people with us, many of them still not at their best. They'll be trying to make it to the ship. That may be a problem, said Mistogin as he arrived with Meteor and looked at the ship they had come on. It was nothing more than wreckage now. We can probably escape on the other ship we have though. It's mine and I reckon we should be able to get everyone in, though it may be a tight fit. Kisuke eyed the approaching vessels before nodding. Do it. Can you redirect everyone towards it? I can, but we are going to need time. We need to contact Doran Bolt and get his coordinates right now. He's probably moved to avoid detection. Mirti can help you, offered Byakuya. She's skilled enough at detection to locate him. Good. The second issue is going to be that we will have to teleport everyone there. Easiest way is through Nozomi's magic, as we'll need Doran Bolt to stay at the ship so she can easily lock onto him. We'll send him or Nozomi to pick the rest of you up once they have gotten on board. Can you buy us some time? Laxus smashed his fists together as lightning intensified around his body. That's easy enough. Get going already. Mistogin nodded before he used Meteor to speed away, hurrying back to the others. Byakuya took another look at his dead men before he gripped his Zanpakuta tighter. Scatter, Senbonzakura. Byakuya's blade broke apart into hundreds of tiny fragments, the amount seeming to be far greater than the blade should have been able to hold, and appeared to be more like his Bankai than his Shikai. Byakuya noticed the look Ichigo and Shinji were giving him before he quickly expanded on the sight they were seeing. I have had 7 years to learn more about Senbonzakura. Because of this, my power and control of him is far greater than it was 7 years ago. Won't that give away that you are working with us though? Asked Laxus. Are you sure that is wise? I am through listening to orders that grind away at my honor and pride. I can no longer fight for an organization who would forsake its own men. I am prepared for the consequences of my actions today. Well said, commented Shinji as he reached up to his face. With one shift move he pulled down and summoned forth his hollow mask, his voice gaining a strange echo to it as he spoke further. Shall I proceed first? Without waiting for a response, Shinji let a Zero charge up in his hands before letting it loose at the ships approaching. Before the beam could hit one, however, it was deflected by a blast of blue energy. So they are here too, said Byakuya in annoyance. Quiljopi and as not. Both Quincy and both extremely deadly. Aren't Quincy always? Said Kisuke jokily before noticing the glare Ichigo sent at him and quickly turned serious. What are they like? Quil's the warden for the jails at the main compound, so he's around a fair amount. He's extremely tough, however, worthy of the title of general because of his strength. As Nod is no exception, however, he is much worse. He is probably the reason they got the information of our location so quickly. He's the one who tortured Taoshiro then, concluded Ichigo with a snarl before he forced his hollow mask to emerge. It was a shaky form and only half formed across his face, similar to the form it had taken during his recent fight with his Bankai. He quickly used the memories he had of that fight as he stuck his arms out to the side and let 2 red orbs start to form in his palms. Both Zeros fired at once, but the size was tiny in comparison to the one Shinji had created, and the beams detonated halfway to the ships. Ichigo swore before Shinji patted him on the back. Don't worry too much about it. You couldn't use Zero before, so that's an improvement from last time. Practice makes perfect. Ichigo sighed before he ripped his mask back off. As he did so, the 10 ships approaching launched another salvo, the heavy blasts of concentrated magic heading straight for them. Kisuke quickly leaped in front of them all, holding out both palms towards the approaching blasts. Bakuda number 81, thank you. The translucent barrier sprung to life between them and the blasts, the energy impacting harmlessly against the stronger spell. That was until a bright blue arrow of magic shot through the air and smashed straight through the barrier. Kisuke barely had time to dodge when it shot straight where he had been, crashing against the ground in a large explosion. Returning fire, Laxus let out a large roar as he fired lightning towards the ships. Lightning Dragon's Roar. As the attack was about to reach the ships, a man appeared in front of the blast, thorns of energy floating around him before they all fired arrow-like projectiles into the incoming lightning blast. It took a few moments, but the lightning was forced apart and the attack destroyed. The man's eyes seemed to lock onto them before he turned his head as if to shout something back. "Well well," said Kisuk curiously. "We've got some tricky soldiers to deal with." Raising his palm towards the ships, he used his other arm to support it while lightly letting his cane hang over his arm. "You might want to brace yourselves. This should draw their attention completely on us after this." A large spark of blue electricity flickered off Kisuk's hands as they all felt the large amount of magical power being poured into the attack. Heida number 88, Hiryu Agekazoku Shinten Reihao. The ground they were standing on shook as a gigantic beam of electrical energy and magical power blasted through the air and shot straight towards the ships. The Quincy in front of the ships turned back in shock before he moved at the last second, the blast crashing into the ship he had been in front of before detonating in a massive explosion. As it cleared, it was apparent that it had not been just that ship that had been caught in the blast, as it had stretched to 4 others nearby, 2 on each side. The ship that had been at the point of impact was scattered all over the sea, nothing but pieces remaining. The 2 ships next to the original were missing good chunks of their own parts near the site of the explosion, while the final 2 ships had just lost their masts from the intense blast. Looking at his work, Kisuk gave it a brief nod before he turned to Byakuya. "If you would mind using your Shikai to keep them occupied. Hopefully they should be a lot more cautious now, and your Zanpakuta should keep them distracted while we wait." Byakuya gave a quick nod before he did just that. The fragments of his blade shot through the air and encircled the remaining ships before he launched attacks from all sides. He could feel it wasn't nearly as effective as what Kisuk had done, however. His blade was split over a very large area and, no matter how much he had improved with his Shikai, it was still only that. It was not his Bankai, and he could not risk using his Bankai when the 2 enemies in front of him were Quincy. A rain of arrows suddenly shot through his attacks, straight towards them. Shinji quickly started cutting them out of their air, a bead of sweat crossing his brow at how intense and powerful each arrow was. A stray arrow got past his cot before it sent him flying back from the impact. The arrows had let up, however, and Byakuya used that time to try and intensify his attacks to make sure that couldn't happen again. Mist Ogden suddenly shot down beside them with Nozomi in his arms before he helped the woman down off him. "I got the others onto the ship. We can leave." "How the hell are we getting out of here?" asked Ichigo before Nozomi waved her hand around her, letting a large disk of energy appeared. Inside it was nothing but a greenish-black void with the edges glowing a yellowy green. "This is my magic," explained Nozomi. "I can manipulate space like I used to in Edalis. It's a lot stronger than back then, however, and will allow you all to reach the ship." The others wasted no time in hurrying through, Byakuya allowing his Shikai to quickly return to normal before rushing through. Ichigo was about to go through when Kisuk pulled him back, holding a hand up to Ichigo's protests. "That magic," said Kisuk curiously but urgently to Nozomi. "It can take you anyway, right?" "Well, I need to know where it is." "If I haven't dashed," she was cut off as Kisuk put his index and middle finger together and pushed them against her head. A strange pattern extended off Kisuk's fingers and across her head, and she felt a burst of sudden knowledge of a location appearing in her mind. "Open a portal to there. Quickly." Nozomi did as he said, the portal she had opened closing before she repeated the same actions she did before. As the portal opened, Kisuk removed his fingers, the info Nozomi had obtained disappearing to the back of her mind without Kisuk keeping it there. Kisuk then turned towards Ichigo before he took off his hat and pressed it against his chest as he lowered his head. "I know right now you have no reason to trust me anymore," said Kisuk, speaking quickly as he noticed the ships nearby were recovering and would probably fire again soon. "I betrayed you in the worst possible way, and I won't ever be able to change that, but I still need you to trust me once more." "Why?" asked Ichigo coldly. "Tell me why I should." "Because I've only had your best interests at heart." Kisuk raised a hand to cut Ichigo off before he could shout. "I know, you may have not always seen it that way, especially with your mother, but I truly always have been doing everything I can to help you become stronger. Right now this portal will take us to where I should have taken you long ago. Please trust me, just once more, and come with me." Ichigo continued to stare at the man until the sound of an explosion reappeared in the air, hitting the ground very close to where they were positioned. I better not regret this, muttered Ichigo before he rushed into the portal, Kisuke following afterwards with a quick wave at the other two. Follow us or not? Your choice. The two shared a glance before they rushed through the portal as well, the portal vanishing the moment Nozomi stepped through last. As it vanished, a large explosion hit the area, leaving nothing but a crater from where the portal had been. Protector of the fairies. Where the hell did those four go? Laxus crossed his arms as he snarled at where the portal had been. They had been wondering what was going on where Ichigo didn't come straight through afterwards, but, before they could check on him, the portal had snapped shut, leaving them stranded on the ship. They were right after us, muttered Byakuya as he stared at where the portal had been. He and Kisuke should have been right after us, following by Mistogen and finally Nozomi. Did someone take out Nozomi? Asked Mirti as she greeted Byakuya. That's one of the few ways the portal could close. What are the others? Asked Shinji, a frown crossing her face. Mirti had to think for a moment as she counted off the ways she could remember on her hands. Well, there's that one, so that was number one, she muttered quietly. Oh, there's also if she runs out of magic, as that would undoubtedly cause the portal to close. Then there is if she had to switch to another spell. Her magic can be restrictive at times. Oh, and she'd also have to close the portal if she wanted to make a new one elsewhere. I don't see why she'd do that though. She might, said Shinji in annoyance. Isn't Ichigo's teacher back there after all? A teacher who freely admitted he's gotten involved in Ichigo's life plenty of times. It's more than likely he told her to switch the coordinates and send them through. I don't understand why Nozomi and Mistogen aren't back here though. Wait, scratch that. I can't speak for the girl, but Mistogen did owe a lot to Ichigo years ago, so that's probably why he followed after him. Nozomi would have gone for the same reason he would have, said Doran Bolt as he exited the control room, drawing the attention of all the mages in the small cargo bay. I'm honestly not surprised they left so quickly when they have been waiting 7 years to continue serving that monster. The silence greeted by Doran Bolt's words was almost agonizing, the thread of pain being almost visible from the looks many of the mages were sending Doran Bolt at his description of Ichigo. Doran Bolt frowned as he saw all those glares before he spoke again. What's the matter with you all? You want to repeat what you called Ichigo? Asked Levi harshly, glaring at him with pure hate in her eyes. Doran Bolt shrugged before he crossed his arms with a sneer across his face. You heard me. Monster. Isn't that what he is after all? The beast trained to slay everything in its path, whether through unnatural skill or monstrous strength. Does any word fit better than a monster? Laxus was about to charge at the man when Byakuya vanished, appearing between everyone and Doran Bolt as a precaution. He gave a warning glare at them all before giving Doran Bolt one as well. You should be more careful with your words. Aren't you the one who admitted once that you and Ichigo are fighting on the same side? Shouldn't you at least offer him some amount of respect? Lying ain't going to change the truth. Hey, at least I recognize him as an ally this time round. Hold on, said Natsu angrily. You're that messed guy, aren't you? You tricked us. Ah, said Doran Bolt mockingly. Well done, Mr. Genius. Aren't you a smart one? Congratulations. Doran Bolt. I get it, Doran Bolt muttered in response to Byakuya's warning. But yeah, that was me. Considering I'm not a member of the Magic Council anymore, I think I should be able to apologize a bit for tricking you. And I probably should apologize as well for trying to kill your pet monster. You did what? Byakuya was forced to draw his sword in order to deflect the 3 strikes that came towards Doran Bolt, blocking Natsu, Grey, and Urza's attacks before spinning round and kicking Laxus back as he tried to get round. Before anyone else could move, an imposing presence fell over them all. Sit down, you brats! Shouted Makarov as he let loose a bit of his own magic into the mix, forcing the fairy tale mages to freeze where they stood. Makarov slowly took in a few deep breaths as he drew his magic back in, trying not to wince as he stretched his injured muscles. With poor Lyosika's help he made his way in front of Byakuya before he joined the man in standing between Doran Bolt and everyone else. Hey Gramps, you can't dash. I won't hear anything more from you lot. There is a time to be angry, but I won't have you take it out on this man, no matter how much you may want to. Makarov shot the man a glare before returning to face his children once more. 7 years have passed since that day. Time may have stood still for us, but it didn't for him. For him to admit to such a thing after all that time, a time where I'm sure more important facts to him would have filled his head, can only mean he truly regrets his actions. Right, Doran Bolt? Doran Bolt nodded at his cue. Well, I won't say I regret calling him what I call him. I'm just being blunt about the facts. He is a monster, and has been ever since he slaughtered that dark guild as a child. I was just foolish enough to not realize which side that monster was on. I made the assumption he was willing to destroy everything, and because of that I missed the leash around his neck. Good enough, I suppose, muttered Makarov, not exactly liking what he heard but still putting on a decent show to make sure no one lost their head and attacked the man again. Now then, do I need to continue to stand here to keep you lot under control, or can I go and sit back down? Because if I'm staying here then I would quite like a chair. My back's not what it used to be. His words did the trick, as most of the anger on many of the mages' faces was replaced by worry for his own condition. The only one it didn't affect, however, was Shinji, but he hadn't attacked yet and he took that for a good sign. Well then, said Doran Bolt, clapping his hands together as Makarov took a seat back in his old spot. I should warn you all to not make any more noise. Well, not in the physical sense but in terms of your magic. Why? Asked Lucy, a curious tilt to her head. Whereabout are we anyway? There aren't any windows to this place. It's a ship. It used to belong to 3 of us, but now it's all mine. All yours. Yep. The fact Miss Doggen and Nozomi ditched me for Ichigo means they willing allowed me to obtain full possession of it. Doesn't that bother you? Asked Lysina. I mean, they must have been your friends after all. Friends? Doran Bolt shook his head. Allies, yes. Friendly acquaintances, definitely. But friends? I consider Ichigo a monster. They consider him their master. Bit of a deal breaker on trying to be friends, wouldn't you say? Doran Bolt chuckled before pointing upwards. Now, as I was trying to answer before, this is a ship. And we are currently 576 meters below sea level. You've got to be joking, muttered Lucy in shock, Levi and a few others having a similar expression. Natsu frowned before he turned towards Lucy. Hey Lucy. What's the big deal about that? We've just really deep, right? It's a bit tougher than that, Natsu. The further down you go, the higher the pressure of the water around you. And as far as I know, there's never been a ship that went down this far underwater. That's because there isn't, said Doran Bolt confidently. Everyone always looks to the skies because of ships like Christina. But we needed an easier way to travel. So we went down. I don't understand though. How did you even manage it? Unless technology increased very rapidly in the past few years. Lucy glanced at the older fairy tale mages only for them to look as shocked as everyone else. I take it that's a no. Well. Doran Bolt brought his hand and rubbed the back of his head nervously. To be honest, we got this through one of our contacts. Grimoire Heart's ship was a treasure trove of technology, one we never let the Magic Council get a hold of. With help we smuggled it all away before they could obtain the secrets held within it, and one of the results of such dangerous actions was this beauty. Doran Bolt quickly shook his head as he got back onto topic. Besides, that isn't why you still need to stay quiet with your magic. It's the Quincy, isn't it? Muttered Shinji in annoyance, getting a nod in response. Why am I not surprised? Those 2 are very capable sensors, supplied Byakuya helpfully. I have to admit myself, however, I am surprised they have yet to detect anything from the magic we've already used. They won't have, though we probably blew a dampener or 2. Doran Bolt reached for his cloak and held up part of it for everyone to see. We only had Nozomi's when this all started. Now we have one for each of us, spares, and a larger version of the principles behind it on the entire ship itself. The man who made these was a goddamn genius. Even with the best help we could enlist, it still took 5 years to even manage to understand and replicate this technology, and it took a whole year after that to get it scaled up onto such a large vessel and to withstand the pressure of being so deep down. We essentially traded out any potential weaponry and shielding for a large cloaking system, one that is only as effective as the people on board, so I would recommend being a bit more cautious with how much magic you let out. The dampeners can only take so much excess magic before they overload, and we can't afford to jettison that excess energy just yet. It's be a massive beacon to the Quincy up there. How long then? Asked Laxus. How long can those things last at their current rate before we're discovered? Doran Bolt shrugged. I'd have to do some calculations for a proper estimate. We've never had this many people on this ship before. Max has been about 7, I think, and now we have an entire guild on board. 7 people lasted about 2 days roughly, but then they weren't all as strong magically as quite a few of you, so 5 hours, 16 minutes, and 21 seconds, said Mirdi suddenly as she stuck her head out of the control room, having snuck in there when Laxus had asked for the time remaining. I could be wrong by a few milliseconds, so I apologize if I got it wrong. She noticed quickly how the most of the expressions facing her were pure shock. What? So I did get wrong? I thought I was so close. No, you are probably right, said Byakuya as he glanced his apprentice. He looked back at the others before gesturing at Mirdi. I can vouch for her calculation. She may not seem like it at times, but she has a very high grasp on calculations and other types of data. A side effect most likely from her time in Grimoire Heart. 5 hours roughly then, said Shinji, being the first to snap out of the shock Mirdi caused. Better question then. How long till those Quincy bastards give up and go home? Or can we move the ship during this time? We can't, I'm afraid, said Doran Bolt. Normally that isn't a problem, but even the slightest change in magic might be picked up by those Quincy, and the dampeners are already having their hands full dealing with all of you lot. We can't afford to put additional strain on them. We should have no worries, Byakuya said confidently. The most they are likely to stay for is an hour or 2. It will not take them long to find out that we have all vanished, and there is no benefit to staying in a wasteland. Lahar is also a stickler for the rules. He will undoubtedly want to make his report to the chairman as soon as possible. If that is all everyone will need me for, said Doran Bolt as he raised a hand in farewell, I will be in the control room. Once it's safe, I'll take us to land somewhere. I'll let you all know if anything changes. The man quickly strolled away as confidently as he could and shut the door behind him, only then letting his body shake a bit. He was arrogant at times, he wouldn't deny it. But despite all his confidence, he couldn't deny that it had been nerve-wracking to face so much intense hatred against him. Outside the room, sensing the danger had finally passed, Byakuya sheathed his blade away and stepped to one side of the room to lean against the wall. He may have called his vessel small, but the cargo bay was larger than he gave it credit for. It simply appeared smaller than it actually was. Mirdi took a seat beside him as she hummed a tune, finally stopping out of annoyance of the situation. I can't believe Nozomi left again without saying goodbye. We both know you'll be clinging to her next time you see her, so don't pout. It doesn't suit the face of a Resp-Byakuya cut himself off as he realized what he was about to say. It doesn't suit the face of my apprentice. The mistakes of the apprentice are the mistakes of the master, Mirdi muttered with a smile. Seems that won't change even if we aren't Rune Knights anymore. Can't believe I've now ended up betraying 2 big organizations. There is no proof. They won't care about proof, Mirdi whispered, pulling her legs up to her chest. They never do. We've seen that in action. And I was already under suspicion ever since my first day there. The mistakes of the master are also the mistakes of the apprentice when the apprentice is a former dark mage. Mirdi shook her head rapidly, plastering a smile across her face. But this should be interesting. New group and all. Hey, 3rd time's the charm, you know. Protector of the fairies. Quilge swore as he walked across the field of bodies, not really caring if he stepped on them beyond if it would dirty his impeccable white uniform, but still having to put on a bit of a show for the men watching nearby. They were all too hesitant to follow him, and he almost wanted to sneer at how pathetic they were. As if a sight like this was enough to make his stomach crawl. Asnod was of the same mind, but he paid no heed to getting his uniform messy, poking and prodding different parts of the bodies as if it would give him some kind of answer. Disgusting, muttered Lahar as he hesitantly joined the 2 Quincy, navigating the blood and remains as quickly and as cleanly as he could. I didn't think Fairy Tale was capable of such brutality. You are sure this is where you saw they were attacking from? Undoubtedly, said Quilge. Their aim was quite good and this is the only place it could have come from. These bodies. You don't think this was our cannon fire? I have to be sure when I report to the chairman. We saw where the men were and chose to avoid that area, or at least until Fairy Tail started firing from there. Before they did though, we all saw the explosion. Whatever happened to these men, it was not the doing of the Magic Council. I see. Lahar shook his head sadly. It is hard but I believe I can recognize a few of these men. They were with me 7 years ago at the Tenro Island incident. I wish it was under better circumstances that I would learn that they had survived but it seems fate wants to mess with us all today. Their families won't be informed. We already told them they were dead. What good would it be to say that we found them alive only for them to die moments later? It'd cause far too much pain. Quilge nodded his head. As you wish. He waited until Lahar had departed to join the rest of the men before he joined Asnod, the man looking up from the body he was inspecting with a glint in his eye. She was here. That mischievous minx? Why does that not surprise me? And how did she find out about our little operation? Obviously someone informed her. How rude of her to act without telling me. I would have quite liked to have seen the fear on these men's faces as they died. And be caught in the explosion too? If you have a death wise then you can go right on ahead. What is inexcusable is that she interfered in our operation without informing of us beforehand. Not that this can't have its own little spin on this for Fairy Tail's reputation but it certainly makes things tougher. How exactly are we to find Ichigo Kurosaki now? After all, his magical power completely vanished during our attack. He, and the rest of the people on the island, have all vanished. They could still be around here. If they are then it would be foolish for us to try and find them. If they stuck around then they either have an extremely fortified position or they have a very hard location to reach. Either is beyond the scale of our task and it is not necessary to pursue them any further for now. Patience is necessary here. They will turn up in time. And with them, Ichigo Kurosaki. Quilge frowned slightly. You sensed his magical power, right? Of course. That technique he tried was definitely that of a Hollows. And yet his magical power resonated partly with my own. How interesting, and how strange too. This would be so much easier if you had let me have more time with the Shinigami, said Asnod in annoyance, Quilge shaking his head as his fellow Quincy's actions. He has impressively strong will, even in such situations. You could have gotten more from him given a little bit more time but we didn't exactly have the time to spare back then. We were in a bit of a rush. Suffice to say, he may know more but it's likely the knowledge he has will now be useless. Such a shame but I'm afraid you may have lost your latest plaything. Asnod glared at him. I could still have plenty of fun. And you'd make a lot more noise without me to shield you and your power from view. And I have no interest in your playtime if there is no reward at the end of it. Shelve those urges for the next unlucky soul to arrive. You can have you fun then. I better, snarled Asnod as he turned away. Quilge only nodded as he left the man to whatever he was doing with the bodies. It couldn't be anywhere as near as disturbing as what that girl did. After seeing that, nothing Asnod did could bother him too much. A slight sensation brushed against his magic and he quickly turned to try and identify the source. He almost had it but the magic vanished just as quickly as it arrived, as if it had sensed his actions as well. Sighing, he quickly waved Asnod back with him as they rejoined the Rune Knights and began to head back to the ships. Today had been a failure, pure and simple. There was no point sticking around to try and change that. As the Quincy left, a girl sat on the air far above them, her legs crossed by her lap as she scowled at the men below her. Idiots. Didn't even bother looking for me. They think you are gone, came a voice from behind her, the girl not bothering to look behind her. Foolish to assume such a thing. If I was trying to kill them then now would have been a perfect time. But you aren't. They have already come to the conclusion of your actions anyway, hence why there is no point in searching for you. The girl scowled all the same as she pushed her long black hair behind her and adjusted her white cap on her head. Don't care. Those guys are fucking morons. Why are you still here anyway? Why? The girl smirked sadistically. I wanted to see the chaos my actions brought to everyone firsthand. You thought I would leave after such beautiful chaos. I would have preferred it if you did. What? You want to keep Ichigo Kurosaki all to yourself? Go ahead. I'm just interested in the chaos that follows these events. The girl lipped her lips in anticipation. It's going to be incredible. So long as you know your role, Bambietta. Bambietta smirked. Of course. When have I ever forgotten? Protector of the fairies. The man who forges souls. There was nothing but silence by the beach. A small town in the distance lit up the night, but even that was dimming as the hours dragged on and on. The land was slowly covered by a cloak of darkness, and it was only then did the water start to act strangely. With each passing second the ripples in the water increased in scale before finally a ship rose from deep below the sea, quickly pulling into a hidden cove as a small disguised barrier dropped to allow them passage. It quickly sealed itself back up after the ship was safely enclosed, and the cave the ship was now in was plunged into complete darkness. After a few seconds, however, lights started to flicker to light, the lacrimas powering the lights held up loosely by struts and cables with a few drilled part way into the rock walls. Doran Bolt teleported onto the top of the ship as he quickly glanced around, confirming it was safe to depart on the off chance the Magic Council might have found out about this base. It was unlikely, but it could always happen, and he certainly didn't want to risk it on the off chance there were leads out there who had betrayed them, whether willingly or not. Fairy Tail after all had lost all their bases thanks to Taoshiro's capture, so this was the only safe place for them currently. He quickly teleported back onto the ship, appearing in front of the waiting guild before he hit a button on the ship's wall. The doorway behind him slowly began to move as the cargo bay doors opened, revealing a large walkway that was slowly approaching the ship as it extended outwards. Welcome to my humble abode. Please try not to make yourselves feel too much at home. I know what you do to your home after all. We'll all be careful, said Gildarts with a laugh. Right, guys? We don't want to hear that from you, muttered Laxus, the older man simply chuckling a bit more. What can I say? I'm a bit clumsy. He'll watch himself, said Kana before she glared at her father. Right, Dad? Gildarts nodded sheepishly, not noticing the sudden shocked faces of the guild nearby. All right, I'll be careful. The guild slowly followed Doran Bolt around the small base as he began to show them around, only a few not following and instead staying by the ship. Shinji glanced over at times to the others, Levi and Laxus doing exactly what he was and simply sitting at the edge by the water. He could see Wendy hovering near the back a bit, looking like she was anxious to talk to Levi about something, but he had no idea of what she wanted to say. Maybe she was worried about Ichigo as much as they were. Where do you think he went? Asked Laxus finally, glancing at Shinji. Levi's probably the one who knows him best, what with me gone for a while, but you knew him for the past 3 years, ignoring the 7-year gap of course. You were privy to stuff we weren't there for. Anywhere you think he might have once mentioned? Or anything he might have said about Kisukura Hara? Shinji frowned as he pulled a leg against his chest and leaned against it. Kisukura Hara, huh? That man, so full of secrets and plans, I've never met a man like that before. The closest was well, he was an old associate, you could say. A scientist who did me a few unwanted favors. And yet, despite all that Kisuk is, he was more honest than I had ever expected. Maybe it was because he wasn't talking to me mainly but Ichigo instead, a person he doesn't want to lie to despite how much easier it could make things sometimes. You had a proper chat with him? He barely spoke to me, but then he did keep himself hidden and away from everyone else quite well. I was present, so I guess it counts. Shinji sighed. He told Ichigo stuff. Stuff he didn't know, and some stuff I had guessed at but wasn't sure about, and it made him question a lot of things. Ichigo mentioned that Zanjitsu had been lying to him, added Levi in worry. Is that what this is about? Shinji nodded. Exactly that. Ichigo's Zanpakuto, it was never what I expected. The Shikai was enough to let slide, but it was always something about his Bankai that bothered me. He always seemed so slow. Slow. Laxus shook his head. Trust me, he is much faster than I am. And I'm fast. Yes, but I watched your fight. Especially the difference between your speed and power before Ichigo used Bankai. Tell me, how did it feel to fight against him? Did it feel like he was using the amount of power he should have been using? Even when you pulled out that trump card, he stopped it by holofying, something that actually increased his Bankai's power more than it ever should have been capable of. His holo. Levi frowned as well. I did notice when he used that mask that he got stronger, but are you saying it was strengthening his Shinigami side more than his holo side? Exactly that. You might not have known this, or at least Laxus there won't have, but Ichigo lost his ability to use his holo powers sometime between the events of Nirvana and the time he was reunited with everyone in Edolis. What he probably didn't tell you, if he truly realized it back then, was that his Shinigami side was also weakening. It's what made him ill. The conflict inside his own soul made his power become unstable. The two powers being linked is the only conclusion you can truly gain from that. But you know more, don't you? Shinji's silence was more damning than anything else. Why won't you tell us? Because that's Ichigo's story to tell. I told you what I knew logically and could potentially infer before my talk with Kisuke, adding one or two details to allow it all to make sense. I won't say any more even if you beg me, though it would be fun to watch, so go ahead if you want. Tell me one thing then, said Laxus seriously. Is it over? I saw him use that attack, even if it did fail. That was definitely a hollow zero. It was, but how do you know that? I've never shown you a zero before, Ichigo has never used one in your presence, so how do you know about them? How do you know what they look like? I asked you a question dash. And I'll answer. After you do. Laxus swore. Fine then. I've been training a lot ever since I left Magnolia, but I wasn't just training too. I heard rumors. Rumors of people vanishing near a place called Hueco Mundo. I couldn't help but try and see if I could lend a hand. I didn't expect to find a whole realm of hollows though. Hueco Mundo? Asked Wendy quietly from behind them all. Hollows. Ah, Wendy, said Levi as she gestured for Wendy to come closer and join them. Don't hang so far back. I almost forgot you were there with how quiet you're being. Gesturing next to her, Levi waited for Wendy to take a seat next to her before answering the younger girl's questions. Hollows are kind of like these mindless beasts, at the early stage at least I believe. Longer one lasts, the stronger it gets, the more intelligent it becomes, you get the idea. They've been described as the ultimate example of survival of the fittest at times. As for Hueco Mundo. Levi scratched her head. Sorry, drawing a blank on that one. Laxus, continue please. Laxus shook his head in amusement at the girl's demand. Hueco Mundo can be described as a desert, though every grain of sand there is pure white. Any trees are made of a bone-like structure, very similar to the masks the hollows there wear. It's also the home of all hollows and where they normally retreat to, or at least it is from my best understanding of the place. There's something about that desert. Something in the air. Further in you go as well, the more powerful the hollows. I assume you found a Minos evolution then? Asked Shinji. Jillian. Laxus just looked confused at his question, which forced Shinji to sigh and ask again. Big hollow? Extremely tall with a large mask and a pointed nose? Fires a red beam from its mouth. That's the one. Guy was a real pain until I destroyed that large mask it had. It just drew so many of the other hollows nearby with how much noise it made as it attacked. I see. A dangerous place to visit. I was fine. It does bother me though. Can hollows band together? Of course. Pack instincts. Laxus quickly shook his head. Nothing like that. When I was there, I found them almost like they were organized. They had built something, or were, but it looked extremely far along if it was still in progress. And it was big too. It was almost like they were making a base of some kind. That's impossible. There isn't anyone out there capable of commanding that many hollows without it all falling apart. You're lying. Are you okay? Asked Laxus concerned. You're shaking. Shinji looked down at himself to realize Laxus was right. It was only his hand, but he could barely stop it from shaking. He couldn't help it. It was more than the idea of a large number of hollows massing under one banner. It was that other hollow. Ulquioricifer. He had sensed that Hollow's power. It was immense. And Kisuk had said that the Hollow had a master. He couldn't help but draw links between these two events. Was it possible both masters were one and the same? If so, he wasn't sure he ever wanted to meet such a person. They would undoubtedly be like a monster in terms of strength. Alright, I'll answer your question for you now. Ichigo's not alright. The fact he can use his hollow powers is a sign that he has temporarily regressed back to an earlier stage, but it won't last forever. I feel like Kisuk probably knows that as well. If Ichigo is anywhere right now, it is where he is needed the most to be saved. And it probably involves getting his Zanpakuto sorted out. And you're sure that's where he's gone? Yes. Why? Laxus frowned. I'm worried. How should I put this? Right before he rushed down to the beach the first time, I was talking to him about Hades. He got a bit shaken up when I mentioned somewhere called the Holy Palace. The Holy Palace. Laxus nodded, causing Shinji to frown as well. What did you say to Ichigo? Can you remember? Hold on a second, said Laxus as he scratched his chin. It was a while ago now and a lot of stuff has caught my attention since then. What was it? A place of blinding light. And magnificence, said Levi as she took over for Laxus. He said that was from the outside alone and that trying to enter lost him the sight in his right eye. Yeah, that was it. And Ichigo kept acting strangely then. I know. He was anxious, I would say. He even started turning till he stopped himself. He was acting strangely when I first went up to him too. Like he was talking to himself. What else? Asked Shinji. What else did you tell him? Well, not much after that. I mentioned how Zeref got through the doors and was the reason Hades was able to see inside. And then I mentioned how Zeref gave him his right eye and Ichigo got a bit tense, I guess would be the best way to describe it. I'd say he was afraid, suggested Levi helpfully. Or agitated. That wasn't what bothered me, however. He called Hades Prect, and yet I never told him anything to link him with that name. Maybe she told him, suggested Wendy, shrinking back a bit as three heads snapped towards her. I mean dash. Who told him, snapped Shinji harshly, Wendy nervously hiding behind Levi to escape his gaze. Levi glared at Shinji before she softened her gaze towards Wendy. Don't worry, you can tell us. What did you see? I just assumed you could all see her too, but then I did notice some odd stuff with her. She kept following Ichigo wherever he went, and always seemed to float through the air rather than run along the ground. She was right by you when you two were talking with Ichigo and yet you didn't even acknowledge she was there. I didn't even recognize her, so I was unsure of what to do. Did I hear you right? Came the master's voice suddenly, causing all four heads to quickly stare at him. Makarov's appearance, while still not the best, had finally recovered enough to move around freely. I'm sorry if I was eavesdropping, but I couldn't help but overhear what you said. Did you saw Ichigo was with someone only Wendy could see? And you, Levi, did you saw Ichigo talking to himself? Yeah, admitted Levi. Is that important to you? Maybe. Makarov slowly joined the group as he crossed his hands behind his back. You see, you talked about how Ichigo knew the second's name. I also encountered this myself, far earlier on that you lot did. I assumed he had read it somewhere, but I'm not so sure anymore. Laxus, do you know who Yuri is? Laxus shook his head. No. Who the hell is he? Respect please. He's your great-grandfather. Laxus froze. And you're saying Ichigo knew who he was? Why didn't he tell me anything? Because I don't think he did. He seemed confused at the name when he heard it, and I didn't say it. The voice speaking to him, would you like to know who it was? Four heads nodded at his question. It was the first, Mavis Vermilion. But she's dead, said Levi in protest. All the stories about her state that she died. Exactly. And yet Ichigo hears her voice. And it appears now that Wendy can see her, and let us not forget that young Wendy here has a very unique gift. To see magic itself. She was the same as Ichigo too, added Wendy. Though there were differences. It was kind of like she had the same protection, and yet at the same time it was like it was already there. I'm not sure exactly what she was. But she did remind me of someone. I'm just not sure of who yet. She was certainly someone strong, however. I could feel Nabara's presence while she was around, as if he had woken up because of something. Suffice to say, I think you all should keep this quiet for the time being, suggested the master. No point adding more worries and confusion to everyone else's plate. What about Ichigo though, Gramps? Asked Laxus. Are we going to search for him or not? We'll leave him alone for now. No matter how much I despite Kisuk, I do trust Ichigo. And I do trust that Kisuk has an interest in Ichigo. He'll be alright. And he'll turn up eventually as well, probably in better health too. For now we have more pressing matters to deal with. I've got one, said Shinji with a dark smile stretched across his face. Let's start with getting Taushiro back. Protector of the Fairies. Not far now, Ichigo, called Kisuk as he led Ichigo up a large cliff face. Normally they would have just used Shunpo to get up there, however for some reason it felt like there was a massive pressure falling down on them whenever they did so, forcing them to take the long and hard route. Their original destination had meant to be right up on top of the cliff, but instead they had been forced miles away and were forced to travel that remaining distance. If Shunpo hadn't stopped working, then they could have gotten there in a fifth of the time at least. All the traps along the path didn't help either. Neither did the large beasts too. At long last though, they were finally approaching the top of the cliff. With a large grunt, Kisuk swung his hand over the top and pulled himself up, extending a hand back down for Ichigo to grab onto. Once Ichigo was pulled up, they both offered the same treatment to Nozomi and Mistogen below them. Finally, muttered Mistogen as he quickly swiped off any dust and dirt off his suit. I thought we would never get there. Nozomi didn't say anything as she mirrored Mistogen's actions, though she did have an annoyed look on her face as Mistogen spoke, his words reminding her of the fact her portal had failed to take them all the way. Ichigo frowned as he looked around, trying to spot the place Kisuk had been talking about. All he could see, however, was a small shack, and that didn't seem to fit the image of what Kisuk described. Where exactly is Aoyasu Nimeya meant to be anyway? I don't see any sign of him anyway. He should be in there, answered Kisuk as he gestured over at the small shack. Really? From your description of the guy, I expected something a bit grander? Flashier? Exactly. Well, said Kisuk with a chuckle, I can see why you would get that assumption. Unfortunately there isn't many ways to get construction workers here for a task that grand, and he is a far simpler man than you might expect. If he wanted more, then he would move and go elsewhere. Well then. What are we waiting for? Let's go. Ichigo started to walk forward and Mistogen and Nozomi quickly fell in line behind him, only to be stopped by Kisuk. Not you two. Why? Demanded Mistogen. What's wrong with us coming? You don't trust little old me to keep Ichigo safe? No, said Nozomi quickly. You had to ask Ichigo to trust you again. That doesn't give us high hopes in trusting you. Kisuk smirked. Such harsh words from such a pretty girl. But I suppose I deserve them. Have no fear. I wouldn't throw Ichigo into a lion's den unless I was sure he could handle it. That still means you'll throw him into a lion's den, pointed out Mistogen, but Kisuk was already leaving them, ignoring them as he did so. Ichigo quickly gave them a reassuring smile before rushing after Kisuk. So why can't they come with us? Ichigo asked as he caught up to Kisuk, frowning as he asked. Is it because they aren't Shinigami? Not completely. I just don't want Aoyasu to get distracted by so many people. He'll be impossible to keep on task, and he might also try and use them to lose focus on what you want to ask. On purpose. You need him to forge you a Zanpakuto, and you've spent most of your life using a blade that has been pretending to be one of his own creations. I'm sure he'll take offense to that, and we can't just lie either. He'll take one look at you and know everything about your current Zanpakuto. He'll know you've learned Bankai, even if it is from a fake. Reaching the door, Kisuk brought up his hand to knock, only for the door to slide open as he did so, revealing a girl with a head of spiky hair pulled back into a ponytail. She took one look at them before her eyes latched onto Ichigo. In one swift move she grabbed a hold of him and threw him past her, trying to shut the door immediately after. As she tried to, however, Kisuk's foot and hand jumped into her path and held the door open. Now, don't be rude to little old me. Get out of here, you loser. Benihim's perfectly fine, so you have no business here. Oh, I think you will find I do, said Kisuk a bit more forcefully. That's my student you just threw in there. I'd quite like to join him. No means dash. Don't be a downer, Mara girl, called a voice from behind the girl, causing Mara to scowl in annoyance as he head span round to face the man. She didn't say anything, however, letting the door open again and for Kisuk to pass through. As soon as he was in, she slammed the door shut, and then added some of the locks on it for good measure. They still have friends out there. I'm not letting them in. Aw, come on, Mara. The more the merrier the better. It's been a long time since I threw a party. The man locked eyes with Kisuk before smiling happily as he swung an arm over the man's shoulders. Kisuk Urahara, long time no see. You never write. Well, none of you ever do, but still. I trust Benihim has been up to your desired standards. 100% satisfaction. That's the Nime-ya guarantee. She's treated me very well, said Kisuk, keeping a solid grip on his Zanpakuto in case Aoesu decided to steal it off him when he wasn't looking. The man was hard to predict at times, even for someone like himself. But I think you know that isn't why I'm here. Ah yes, said Aoesu as he turned towards Ichigo. Welcome, familiar face. You have entered the great Aoesu Nime Yazhouden. Zanpakuto creator extraordinaire, at your service. Ichigo scowled from his crumbled position, his head resting against the floor while his back was pressed against the wall. He quickly pushed himself out of the position he had been thrown into before glancing around the room. This place is far bigger than it looks. Ah well, looks can be deceiving. I've also expanded downwards a lot so I make the space I need. The appearance though from the outside leaves something to be desired. Maybe I'd get more guests if I changed it? Of course maybe it has something to do with the long walk people have to make. I can't believe the nerve of some people when they try to take a shortcut and just, I don't know, cut a hole in space and enter through that. I thought that was you pushing us away, said Kisuk, a hint of annoyance hidden beneath a beaming smile. How kind of you to give us a nice refreshing walk. It wasn't like we wanted to head right up to you anyway. Aoesu smiled as well. I'm always thinking about the well-being of my friends. I'm glad you appreciate the effort. So many people just get annoyed about it all and try and attack me. And then they never end up visiting again. Never sure why. Aoesu glanced towards Ichigo before he quickly released Kisuk, walking casually towards the orange-haired Shinigami. Well now, I have to admit that I never thought I'd see that face again though. And you haven't even aged a day. I assume it wasn't just you who survived then? Makarov. Ichigo nodded. They all did. Makarov's fine. Well, that's good. That old guy has a good sense of humor and does know how to party. Now that's a rare talent. Aoesu crossed his arms as a serious expression crossed his face. Now why don't you tell me what you came here for, little Ichi? Ichigo scowled at the name he had been called before drawing his Zanpakuto and holding it out in front of him. Aoesu took one glance at the blade before he glanced back to Kisuk. That's not a Zanpakuto. I didn't make that blade. I know. Mind explaining to me why he has such a weapon then? Why he managed to unlock Bankai with such a pathetic blade? Hey. This blade isn't Desh. Ichigo was cut off by Aoesu glare before he turned it right back on Kisuk. This blade? Why not call the blade by its name? What exactly have you been experimenting with? Or do I have to ask Benihim instead? It is a simple side effect from his very specific training procedure. I wanted to hold off bringing him to you until I felt he was strong enough to handle a Zanpakuto. No you didn't, said Aoesu as he clicked his fingers. Underneath Ichigo opened a massive hole and Ichigo found himself falling before he could even try and do anything, his ability to grasp the air vanishing as he fell. You were afraid I'd kill him on sight because of what he is. Kisuk rushed to the hole, staring down as he saw Ichigo on the ground below. The hole wasn't too deep so he wasn't too worried about any injuries Ichigo might have taken. What he was worried about however was what this hole was. He remembered it from his time here long ago. That could only mean one thing. Yes, Aoesu said as he joined Kisuk, reading the man's mind from the expression on his face. This is the same place. Looking down the hole at Ichigo, Aoesu gave Ichigo a wave as he started getting up. Enjoy the trip down, Ichi. Screw you. Get me out of here. Aoesu winced playfully. Oh, don't be so cold, Ichi. We're friends, right? You bastard. Hey, now don't be like that. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, and now a 3. I am Oetsunime Ya, the #1 Zanpakuto creator. If you don't like my methods, then prove how much at fault they are. I don't make swords for weaklings who can't even pass my test. Ichigo wanted to shout at the man more, but a sound behind him made him stop. His head whipped around to look for the source just in time to see black shapes making their way out of the darkness, more coming with every second from every direction. Ichigo gripped the blade in his hands tightly as his head whipped back and forth between them all. What the hell are these things? These things. Aoesu looked at the black figures, all of the blank except for small mouths where eyes should have been. They are my masterpieces. They are the strongest Zanpakuto. They can become anything. They are the Asachi. So don't be scared, Ichi. They won't harm you. One of the Asachi suddenly lunged forward, attempted to grab Ichigo and forcing him to dodge. Won't harm me. Ichigo shouted as he dodged more that were suddenly jumping at him. What the hell is this then? Well, it seems they really don't like you. Never seen such a vicious reaction to a newcomer before. You are something special, Ichi, you know that. What are you doing? Demanded Kisuk as he watched Aoesu watch the sight below with glee. Get him out of there. He's in no condition to fight this many opponents. Then hope he passes. If he doesn't, maybe that's for the best. Better for hybrids to die sometimes than get set loose on the world. Udesh. Before Kisuk could even reach for his Zanpakuto, Mera grabbed him from behind and they both disappeared with a snap of Aoesu's fingers. A second later Mera returned, now without Kisuk. Wonderful technique the Chukaimon is, muttered Aoesu to himself. Gets rid of all the little distractions for me to focus. You sure he won't get back in? Asked Mera. He's a resourceful one. It'll take him at least a week to penetrate the barriers around this place. Maybe a bit less, but he won't be done before 3 days are up. That's all I'll give his little apprentice. 3 days, and if he can't do it then that's it. Game over. Aoesu glanced over the edge again at Ichigo before calling out to him as he dodged the Asachi. How much do you know about the Asachi truly? They are actually without name from the very start, a fact not many people realize. Only time changes that as the soul of the wielder imprints onto the Asachi and it becomes their own personal Zanpakuto. So these things are a manifestation of the essence of the Asachi, right? Manifestations? Yeah, that do for the sake of this little chat. But that's not important really. What's the matter is that they are very angry with you. I said it before, I've never seen them so angry with anyone. Not for any other Shinigami. Angry. Ichigo dodged one of the Asachi before kicking another away. Why? Haven't you realized? It's the way you use that blade you call a Zanpakuto. Ichigo frowned as he dodged. How I use it? Yep. Maybe that's why they're so mad, but they've faced Shinigami who broke their Bankai, so it's not that reason. What do you think it is, Ichi? I don't blame you for not knowing. Is it the way you swing your sword? The way you fight? Wrong, wrong, wrong. Even the basis of that idea is wrong. You aren't handling an ordinary sword after all. Ichigo swiftly jumped over an Asachi before getting hit by one in a blind spot. He quickly recovered before calling back up. I don't understand. What basis? How do you think of that blade of yours? You've used your Zanpakuto as a tool? Treated it like you would subordinates? Relied on it like a partner? As family? As friends? Role models? Students? Pets? Acquaintances? Sweethearts? Lovers? Stop fooling around. Aoesu shook his head as he looked at all the Asachi below him. This is the answer to your mind, Ichi. They find it wrong. That's what they're trying to tell you. You're looking at it all wrong, So let's start with something simpler. Aoyasu smirked as he watched the Asashi all charge at once. Which is superior? The Zanpakuto or the Shinigami? Protector of the fairies. As the last of the dark mages in front of him fell, the blonde-haired man let himself fall back onto some of the crumbled ruins and let out a sign of relief. Finally, he muttered towards his black-haired friend. There was almost no end to them. Don't tell me you think they were strong, Sting? Asked his friend as he crossed his arms over his cloak. A plain grey top could be sudden under the cloak as he did so, with 4 long pieces of cloth reaching down over his trousers from a sash wrapped around his waist. Over the lower half of his legs were a pair of armored plates, connecting down to a pair of brown-colored boots. Sting rapidly shook his head. Unlike his friend who wore a lot of black, he wore a few brighter colors, including a bright blue vest with a fur inner edge around it along with a golden trimming on the other edges, also exposing a lot of his chest and all of his arms. Long blue gloves went from his hands all the way up to his mid-bicep while darker cream trousers connected to the vest through 2 suspenders. I'm just not a fan of long drawn-out fights like these, Rogue. Too much of a pain. Rogue frowned. Be careful with who you tell that to. The master is not a lenient man if he perceives you to be weak. He'll increase your training 100-fold and make it all dedicated to fighting multiple opponents at once. Possibly even with himself joining in to make sure you learn properly. Sting smirked, a pair of sharp canines appearing as he did so. He wouldn't be that harsh, said Sting as he tapped the guild mark for Sabretooth on his left shoulder. We're some of his prized members after all. That is exactly why he would act that way, explained Rogue, sighing from how his friend was acting. He pointed at his own guild mark on his cloak, his primary one hidden beneath his shirt, before speaking. This mark shows we are part of the current strongest guild. And we had to work hard to get this title. After our victory at the Grand Magic Games, even more pressure is on us to win when it comes around once again. You think the Master will accept any weakness from us, especially considering we are 2 of the strongest mages in the entire guild? No, of course he won't. Sting scoffed. What's there to worry about? It's not like there's much competition from the other guilds. Last year proved that to us. That was last year. The other guild masters are proud people. They won't let us win again, especially with the effect winning can have on the jobs that come in. I've already heard rumors that Juraniki's is going to be participating in the next games, and they have a strong enough team as it is. Master may want us to always win, but I don't even know how he'd react if we lost to the man. They're one guild, Rogue. You're overreacting. Am I? What about Mermaid Heel? What about Quattro Cerberus? They both have got much stronger mages appearing, and no one can deny the effect that can have. We were part of the 5 mages that changed Sabretooth's reputation forever. And you can't tell me you haven't heard the news. Sting smiled happily. Oh, I did. I got hold of the rumor from someone in town. It's been spreading like wildfire. Tenro Island, restored. And you understand what that means, don't you? Fairy Tail, their strongest mages, are back. If they were to leave the guild and rejoin a new one, they would be a sudden boost. That is of course so long as they are still strong in this day and age. Natsu, muttered Sting happily. Well, let's hope he does turn up. Who cares about what else may happen? Don't tell me you don't want to fight Gajeel. The twin dragons of Sabretooth vs Salamander and Black Steel. Now wouldn't that be fun? Honestly. Rogue shook his head in annoyance, but it was less as serious as before. Let's get back already. We're done here today, so let's hand in the request and get back for training. We'll miss tonight's if we're lucky, meaning we won't have anything else till the morning session. Maybe at least some of the others will be there too. Rufus is probably back at least, said Sting as he jumped up from his seat and ran after Rogue. Think Orga is too. I remember him mentioned something about doing a bit of scouting of Quattro Cerberus's talent. Whether he'll succeed or not is unknown, but at least the Master can't punish him for that if he fails. It's worth letting him take a day or 2 off to do. Master may get mad, however, if Renji isn't there again. He's been skipping far too much lately. Sting shook his head. His funeral. The Master gets really annoyed at that. What he'd even say he was doing. Bankai training. Sting frowned. Out of all of Sabretooth, they had only even managed to get one Shinigami into their midst. That wasn't too bad in the grand scheme of things considering the Magic Council had most of them anyway. The only others currently in guilds belonged to Mermaid Heel, and that was just Karen Kurosaki. Well, there were rumors that Raventail had managed to get themselves one too, but they weren't very clear yet, so it was hard to tell if they held any truth to them. It could have been a ruse to hide their weak strength because they never even got past the first round in the Grand Magic Games. A weak Shinigami was not really an effective Shinigami anyway. The strange thing though was that Renji had told them a while back that he had managed to unlock Bankai. Hell, he'd used it during the Grand Magic Games when they won. It had been the decisive blow to end the fight, and it had even shocked the master watching considering Renji had kept it quite quiet. If he already had Bankai, what exactly was he doing now? Refining it? Come on, said Rogue as he snapped Sting out of his thoughts. We might as well get back. I'm sure Lecter and Frosh are waiting back at the town for us anyway. Probably complaining that we left them behind, said Sting with a laugh as he thought about the red exceed that had become his companion. Or at least Lecter will be. I'll buy him a new shirt later on if he doesn't cheer up. Did you think Frosh noticed we were gone? Unlikely. Frosh gets lost so easily, so it is unlikely that Frosh even knows we are gone. Well, Frosh does think he's a frog, so he's not the smartest exceed out there. Don't be ridiculous, said Rogue in annoyance as he pictured the green exceed in the pink frog costume he always wore. He knows he's an exceed, he just wears that costume because he likes it. Wait. Rogue and Sting turned around to see some of the dark mages getting back up. They both sighed before they brought their fists back up. Seems like we'll be later than we thought. Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.